I cannot survive without notes.
Why hasn't our country produced a Google, a Facebook, Nvidia?
What I could have done better at IIM was actually learned.
Structured thinking, diligence, and
We know the child's date of birth. So can you compute their horoscope? But what we found was that not only does the sun sign make a difference, it is the second largest influential factor in a child's marks.
In the gold medalist, like you have to be special.
There's 88 candidates who got zero that after standing for election they didn't even vote for themselves. I mean, how crazy is that?
Hi, welcome to episode 10 of IIM Bad. Want to welcome our esteemed guest Anand, 1 year junior to us at IIM Bangalore, class of 2001, gold medalist at IMB, and an extremely interesting journey over the last more than 20 years. He recently sold his company, the venture that he built called Gramener. But we'll learn more about him, his journey, and interesting tidbits about his life and his guidance. Anand, welcome.
Thanks, Chow.
Viks and Migs, welcome again. So let's get started. So Anand, why don't you share a quick introduction and then share us about what your journey has been since the time you exited IMB?
So most recently, I was co-founder and CEO of Gramner, which is a company that we started. The way that came about was right after I was at BCG for about 4 years. To me, the most valuable was getting a laptop on day one, and that was the first laptop that I ever owned. So on the train from Bandra to Churchgate, which is a solid half an hour ride every way. I spent all of that time over those years typing out the entire Calvin and Hobbes comic strips, transcribing it. Till date, I believe that that is my greatest achievement, and I happen to have the only archive of typed out Calvin and Hobbes strips.
You typed that in the train?
Yeah, took me
Wow.
took me 7 years totally all put together. But yeah, the bulk of it was from Bandra to Churchgate, so Mumbai and
I think
BCG
that
to
that's
Bangalore.
also a crazy achievement. I have barely seen anyone trying to type in the Bombay suburbans. So
where did you get on the train? Because for me, like just getting a space to stand on one toe used to be difficult.
exactly. वही
I tell you,
बैंड्रा में बैठ के मतलब
it
getting
was
in
a
at Bandra is
the first time I came to Bombay, people warned me about the trains. After that, I became a veteran. So कहीं पे भी कुछ भी
People used to say कि अगर उतरना नहीं है ना ट्रेन से तो कहीं दरवाजे के आसपास मत हो जाना. You were forced to get off. There was no way to come back on the train with the amount, the flow of people there. I'll say, I mean, I might be reminiscing of the few years I worked in Mumbai and went in the local train. But it'll be wrong of me to say if I say I miss those days. I really don't. I don't miss the locals. So you got a laptop from BCG and you made full use of that laptop, transcribing the
totally.
Calvin and Hobbes. फिर कहाँ पे? What happened next? Then were you in BCG for a
And
long time?
I really started missing IT and desperately wanted to get back. So I started applying. Oracle said, "We'll give you a sales job." Microsoft said, "We'll give you a strategy job." IBM said, "We'll give you a project manager job." But ultimately, nobody would let me code. So I had to pick the one option that I got, which was with Infi Consulting, where Infosys Consulting said, "Look, we are taking you into the consulting wing, but okay, fine, you can do whatever software engineering you want as part of that." So I moved to London. But around 2011, my ex-manager from IBM, he reached out and said, "There are a bunch of us, we are getting together, planning to do something interesting. So कुछ करते हैं." And at that point, it was literally "कुछ करते हैं." And eventually, it became Gramner, which is a story in itself. But since 2012, I've been in Gramner, which is a data analytics and visualization company.
Okay.
And
And you joined it right at from scratch, like when it wasn't even a a company registered.
And that was an interesting journey as well, ranging from covering the elections on national television to discovering whether astrology and numerology have an impact on students' marks, to a whole host of fairly interesting pieces of work, which eventually culminated in a few months ago, Gramner being acquired by Strive, which is a publishing a tech and data company. And that's where I will be post the integration closure, which is happening this month end.
So Anand,
Thanks,
this
Jeff.
caught my attention. Astrology and numerology, and whether it has a correlation with the grades. So what did you find?
I'll tell you what I expected to find, which is absolutely nothing. It was a debate that we had with someone at the ministry. We were called to identify what can we do to improve children's marks by the Tamil Nadu government. And we tested a whole bunch of things, basic hypotheses like the gender making a difference. So yeah, clearly girls score higher, and without exception across subjects. In physics, for instance, the difference is practically zero, but in economics it's 7%, and there is an entire spread in between. But in no subject do boys score higher, and we know why. Especially in the higher classes, the girls' dropout ratio is higher. And that is a big factor. The smarter girls are the ones that stay back. And especially given that not all schools have a separate girls' toilet. And in the rural areas, they don't want to send them further away and so on. It's a smaller proportion of girls that stay back and study. And they're usually the smarter ones. So their average does go up, and that at least explains a part. I don't know whether it explains the whole of that. So we were testing a whole series of things when one gentleman said, look, we know the child's date of birth, so can you compute their horoscope? I said, look, we know where you're going with this, but I don't think it makes a difference. Look, just try it. And he's a client, so we said, okay, fine, let's see if the sun sign makes a difference. And we put that in the queue of how much of an impact it makes. Generally, when I ask people, the consensus is what I believed as well, which is, yeah, of course, the sun sign makes no difference. But what we found was that not only does the sun sign make a difference, it is the second largest influential factor in a child's marks. The largest being whether the child is SC, ST, or general category. That is the number one. Number two, with a 10 percentage point impact, is if the child is born in June, they score the lowest. Child born in August or September scores the highest, and the difference is a whopping 10 percentage points, enough to bring the
But does
topper
that
down to
have anything to do with astrology or the cutoff? Like I remember Freakonomics
exactly.
20 years ago, there was that similar theory.
Exactly. Outliers, to be precise, where Malcolm Gladwell talks about the Canadian junior hockey team
Even
having
in
children,
that, yes,
yeah,
yes.
born in the months of January, February, and March. No, exactly.
And
The
that will
school,
probably be different. So, for instance, I see in the UK, we have the school cutoff is 1st September, you're in particular class till 31st August, you're in from so all the kids. My daughter is October born. She's among the older kids in her class. But my son,
mm,
is April, so he's like literally youngest one
youngest.
third. And to me that's a huge difference when you're in nursery or reception or year one. I mean,
Yeah.
after that, I mean, when you're 40, it doesn't matter, right? But when you're
That
3 or 4 years old, it matters a lot.
totally agree. And yeah, that's my theory as well. And it's
Hmm.
fairly strong. I mean, it's got enough base of evidence to prove that. The last bit that you said, when at 40, it probably doesn't make a difference as much. Yes. And I interpolated that and assumed that by class 10 or 12, it shouldn't make that much of a difference as well, because we were measuring the, uh, the, the marks at class 12, and it did make a huge difference. So we broke it down a little bit and looked at how much of a difference there is in class 6. It's only 5%.
Hmm.
So which means that whatever the education system is doing, it's not making that gap narrower, it's widening the gap.
Widening
Yeah.
that gap. Very interesting.
Yes. So my recollection, it's been nearly 20 years I read economics, or maybe 15 years, was that so I think they chose the example of sports because kids who are slightly older, they'll be because then you're 5 years old versus 4 years old. in the
Correct.
same class, the 5-year-old will be more physically stronger. I mean, on average, they'll get
Yes.
selected for the sports team, and because they're selected for the sports team, I mean that gap keeps. I mean, they'll be the ones who end up being in the national team at the end thing of it, and I think they also use that very similar data like you're doing. Very interesting. Uh, and have you compared this? Did you find out that the gap continues to widen? Because that's reminding me of a lot of education gaps that I've worked on in the last decade on how do we improve education. A lot of it is UK focused, but the learnings are similar across the world. Is gaps widen once they are established. Now, it may not be because of birth here, but whatever, it may be economic led, it may be some reason, but gaps in educational outcomes do widen, unfortunately.
Very true.
Hmm.
And the gaps can come from so many sources, right? When we were doing another piece of work for the NCERT, they said, look, we believe that tuitions actually don't help or at least hurt.
Hmm.
So here is the National Achievement Survey data, which is a large scale survey data for about 200,000 students every year across several
Hmm.
years. And let's see if we can use any of the behavioral characteristics of the children
Hmm.
to see what impacts marks. And that was really rich data. We had stuff like, do they play games? If so, how often? Do they read books? If so, how many books? Do they watch television? If so, how many hours? And stuff like that. So the television watching behavior, for instance, was a really interesting factor. The children who watch zero television score the lowest. Those who watch once a month score higher. Those who watch once a week score even higher. But once you start watching once a day, practically daily, your marks start coming down, reinforcing that natural assumption that too much TV is bad. But
Hmm.
what is interesting is this is not consistent across subjects. This is true of sciences, social sciences, but in reading, the more you watch TV, the better you perform. So, English,
Yeah.
yes, it does help. Okay, great.
Hmm.
In mathematics, watching TV every day completely kills your mathematical ability to the point where they score even less than the children who don't watch TV at all, which is usually the poor kids. And if you're doing even worse than them, that's saying something. Interestingly, playing games has almost exactly the opposite pattern. Children who play at least a little bit, they tend to
Hmm.
score reasonably well on English or reading, whatever. But the more you play, the less you score. But with mathematics, the more you play, it's almost a linear increase. So for parents, it's almost a guidance. Right? Want your kids to become engineers? Great. Take them away from the TV, put them in the playground. Want your kids to become journalists? Take them away from the playground, put them in front of the TV. Almost like direct guidance there. So yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
and these, you're right. And once this sort of behavior starts getting set, even
Hmm.
not necessarily consciously, it will widen, right? Because they get more of that reinforcement.
Yes. 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 I mean, there's one thing that I've learned over the last decade and a half that I've been in education investing and researching outcomes. 90%, well, I'm using randomly, this is not based on science, but my gist of all the drivers of educational outcomes, when you normalize those, they can be derived from one biggest umbrella driver, which is parental engagement in the child. So if they are watching TV daily, for instance, it's because यार माँ या बाप ने बोल दिया कि बेटा टीवी देख लो जाके. That's it. That is possible. Now I'm not saying कि वो happens everywhere, but that's one of the reasons. Daily TV चल रहा है या कुछ और चल रहा है. If you see a lot of these correlations, and then you go back to why has that happened, and you correct that parental engagement. So the one I have invested in and continue to look at is how is an in edtech, how is that going to improve educational outcome in case that is your aim? Because
Hmm.
sometimes it's not the aim, right? It's just fun and games. But if that's the aim, and is that through a parental engagement, or is that going to be used as just the kid having another toy? And in edtech, that happens a lot, and there are some benefits of that. But Yeah, I can't say it enough that if you fix the parent, you fix the child's education.
You mentioned the potential lack of evidence on that. So, oddly
Hmm.
enough, on this very study,
Hmm.
the top four factors were father's occupation,
Hmm.
father's education, mother's occupation, mother's education,
Right.
and use of computers was a distant fifth.
Yeah.
Help in household was a distant sixth. And it's a long tail after that. But
So
no,
actually,
absolute
you're seeing the correlation with the occupation, but what
correct.
that occupation is doing, in my view, is it's usually there's a high correlation of the occupation with the parental engagement, and it's the
Yes.
parental engagement that's driving all the outcomes rather than the occupation in and of itself.
Very true. And one of the starkest ways we saw this was the father in India is generally having a slightly, sorry, the mother in India generally has a slightly higher influence than the father. I
Yes,
think I got the
yes,
order wrong. Now, if we look at let's say Punjab and see the order, this is even further reinforced. The mother is the biggest determinant of the child's marks, both education and occupation. The father comes much more second. In West Bengal, it reverses and is one of
okay,
the few states where the
very
father's
interesting.
education occupation is more influential. And yeah, matriarchal society, the father actually has more engagement, as you said, with the children. You can see it in the numbers.
Yes, yes, very interesting. Actually, that's a great segue. So, Anand, we'll come to Gramener and a lot of your career, but can we go back, rewind, where you were before IIM Bangalore? You're from IIT, and why did you come to IIM Bangalore? So, where did you grow up? Was that all in Chennai or Madras, as it was called then?
It was in Madras, and I made my own series of mistakes, some voluntary, some not so voluntary. I was clear as a kid that I wanted to become a physicist. Very clear.
So
So
Anand,
I
why
spent,
didn't your father want you to go out of Chennai? Like he made it a point that you should only choose Chennai, right?
yeah, and all my life I've been here, only child and conservative family. Who's going to let me go out? So my exit options were clear. I mean, post IIT, you either do a master's in your subject, which was no way, or software or CAT. So I tried both, wrote CAT, completely messed up, and for no good reason other than that, I just was nowhere near good enough, and managed to get through the IBM interview, scraped in, and thank heavens that was outside of Chennai, but not too far. So, and given that I had enough relatives in Bangalore, I was allowed to go spend some time in Bangalore. Then I got pissed because I mean, how can I not get through CAT? So I said, "Is bar to likhunga," for no reason other than satisfying my ego. So I applied for CAT again, and I didn't even get the application letter, or I mean, whatever you fill out a form and send the fee, and you get whatever the hall ticket or
Admit
whatever. I
card.
didn't even get. Then it struck me I probably gave my address wrong. So एक साल निकल गया उसमें. Then I said, okay, fine. फिर भी छोड़ूंगा नहीं. I will write it again. I wrote it the next year. This time I got a call from Calcutta and Lucknow and cleared Lucknow. But my ego still hurt. Yeah, this doesn't work. Now I'm
It
going to
can
apply
do
for
better.
all.
So
Huh. And
you got Lucknow, and you didn't go to Lucknow because of ego, but not because of your dad. Ki Lucknow is too far away.
नहीं वो मानेंगे नहीं वो तो पता है. But that is the second thing. Even if he had allowed me to, would I have gone? Maybe not. And then third attempt, this time I said, okay, no, I need help. Clearly, I'm not going to crack this by myself. So I went to a coaching center, did all the rigorous practice and all of that, which helped a hell of a lot. And then now all four come through. I now know the outcome. There's just, I mean, I'm already in Bangalore. That's about as far as I can go now. So the solution was clear: join IIM Bangalore. And the people at the institute were like, "You got IIM Ahmedabad, and you're not taking Ahmedabad."
I didn't go to Ahmedabad. I had a very different logic, which was गुजरात में prohibition है, Bangalore was the pub capital. अगर दोनों का choice है तो और Apparently, the weather was better in Bangalore. That was my official logic for my parents. कि Bangalore का weather अच्छा है.
So,
Yes.
Anand, I noticed something very interesting in your journey. I have a lot of respect for you because you were a gold medalist of the batch next to us, and we have two DMLs on this, director medalist students in this podcast. And in the gold medalist, like you have to be special. Like you just can't work hard to get a gold medal at IIM Bangalore. But then when I look at your career before that, or like your educational, you got IT Chennai chemical engineering, so your rank must have been lower than 500, and then you had to have three attempts to get into IIMs. So are you not a good test taker? And is it because that at IIMs we actually have 3 months to prepare for an exam, and then there's a lot of group presentations and midterms and then finals. So your ability is being measured throughout the 2 years instead of your ability being measured in 2 hours. Is that the difference?
I actually attribute this to my classmates in a somewhat unusual way. I remember one of the first things that I did when I got into campus was locate the CC. Uh, I realized that getting into IBM was one of the best things that I could have done. That's when I realized I love software. Now, I joined because, I mean, how do you say no to IIM? So that's why I was there. But my heart was in software. So I made my way to the computer center and found that, okay, novel netware is there. Great. So I can share stuff. There is a shared folder where I can put stuff. Great. I can, and there are a few open folders there. I said, okay, chalo, let's create a work directory, make it open. Well, the stats assignments started coming in. Chalo, let's put it out there and keep it in the shared folder. Then people started looking at it and saying, अरे यार ये क्या डाल रहे हो? Start assignments, work in progress, जो कर रहा हूँ. Tell me if you spot any mistake. So he said, yeah, look, in this one, this particular logic is not right. अरे हाँ, that is true. चलो वो fix कर दिया. Somebody else came and pointed out some other bug. हाँ ये भी ठीक है, fix कर दिया. And I said, okay, if I'm getting free feedback and corrections and I'm learning from these people as well as from the profs, may as well do more of that. So I put all of my assignments there. And people started pointing that out, which also meant that I ended up having becoming sort of the hub for people to pass information. I said, yeah, stats का tuition लो. Okay, great, वो भी करता हूँ. And in the tuition, I would make half a dozen mistakes every 15 minutes and they would correct it. So I get to learn. In other words, as far as I'm concerned, the reason I was academically successful was because every single person started teaching me.
You actually
There
had the
are three
open
things
source
I can see
effect.
here, Anand. In 1999, you nearly, these are the buds of being cloud-based, having having crowdsourced feedback, and being an expert and posing as an influencer marketing.
Uh, I wish I knew this jargon then. Actually, I wish I knew this jargon now.
All of this jargon
The
has
world
evolved
didn't know
much.
that jargon, but in today, in 2024, we know that these are the three big things, and you quite nearly invented that in '99, right?
I wish.
No, but this is really interesting because I was reading some time back as to different modes of retention of knowledge, right? Where reading is kind of treated as 5%, then writing is 10%, and so on. And the last highest percentage retention is attributed to being able to teach, which is when you are able trying to articulate it better.
That when you teach, two people learn, the person you're teaching and yourself.
So you're being very humble, Anand, and you're attributing your topping the IIM to a lot of classmates. But it seems like there was that diligent effort, even if that wasn't initially that you started off with, but that diligent effort as well as and that structured level of note taking and thinking. And the
Yeah.
reason I stress on the second is I was very poor at that at IIM. I was very good at it during my school and maybe even a bit in university. But then at IIM, partly led by, very unlike you. Uh, I can't think of a single day where I slept before 12 because we were either in certain infamous areas, in some party mode, some level of party mode. So structured thinking, diligence, and the biggest thing being you probably stayed away from all those distractions.
One thing that you mentioned in particular, and I would love to come back to the structured thinking and intelligence part, but you also mentioned note taking. I'm beginning to believe that practically every disadvantage has in it the seeds of some advantage, or put another way, everything bad is also good for you in some shape or form. My memory is terrible, short term, long term, everything. So I cannot survive without notes, not at all. So I've had the habit as a kid of taking copious notes, which continues till date. In almost every meeting that I'm in, I minute
Hmm.
the meeting, I take the notes for the meeting, no matter what, because that serves as my memory.
Right.
And the next time I meet the person, I say, "Who are you?" And he says, "So and so." Hold on. Ah, okay, yes, huh, now I know who you are, which helped. Because what that means is this kind of memory is potentially more scalable. So
I
I
think
believe
that's a
that
very good point you mentioned. Um, and I also reflect back. I mean, there are periods when I've been a diligent note taker, and that has always helped from a professional viewpoint. It's another matter that I hate doing it, but I know that that's important. So and as a slight aside, I think some of Viks and Chow probably know it. So I have started more recently hating face-to-face meetings, and I was always a face-to-face meeting guy. I didn't like Zoom and all that because about 6 or 8 months ago, I discovered um, something called Fathom. I've always taken those note takers, uh, but now with a free AI called Fathom, I mean, it makes all the notes. I don't need to take anything. But in a face-to-face meeting, I don't have it with me. Not yet. Maybe they'll invent something on the phone and then I can just record. And the point is not really noting down everything. The reason I like notes is, as in, who's going to, except for occasionally, see the entire transcript. It's about those 3 or 4 bullet points that are the takeaways from that meeting. And now with generative AI, and some people are doing it better than others, uh, that's coming out from your 3 pages of transcript. People are able to generate some 5 bullet points or 3 bullet points. Here are the takeaways. This is what we discussed. And that's it. That's what you need.
And also, just one other thing I wanted to add to that question. So, you mentioned in your journey before joining, then you finally decided to join a coaching institution and put some structured effort into the preparation. So, if you can just spend a couple of minutes on what that effort was as compared to what you were doing earlier, what does it really mean? And it will help students, especially aspirants who are watching this, to learn from your experiences.
what I could have done better at IIM was actually learned the difference between taking an exam and really understanding it. Say, organization structures, processes, and design. When running Gramner, I realized I badly needed it. I badly needed marketing, and I didn't really understand those well enough. And I had to relearn, and I did not relearn it, and I wish I had learned it then.
I can totally relate to that, Anand, right now as an entrepreneur. The, some of the things which we just thought that okay, we'll hire someone to do it when it is needed. We don't really need to learn it. Is totally incorrect. It's
No,
it's a
I mean,
critical skill to learn.
so at some point we said, let's now organize by business unit. Okay, organize by business unit. And for about 2 years after that, our margins kept coming down, and we were like, okay, हाँ कुछ करना है, blah blah blah. But It wasn't until Anjan from Emphasis, who was helping us out, looked at it and said, yeah, look, you have about 200 people and you have three business units. That's crazy. Your overheads would shoot up like mad, right? I said, yes. How do you know? It's obvious that that kind of structure needs that kind of support. And he said, that is true. Never hit us. Boss, this is exactly what gets covered there. So, yeah, to reiterate, I just wish I had learned better.
You've had a very interesting journey from IIT, IIMs, BCG, running your own company, Infosys in the middle, Lehman Brothers in the middle, London Business School, all that. Like really interesting journey. And I have this concept of the sperm lottery, right? There were 100 million sperms raised. Yours was the lucky one. My question to you is what is your opinion on why hasn't our country produced a Google, a Facebook, a WhatsApp, a Snapchat, ChatGPT, Nvidia? Why hasn't our country, or why hasn't our country produced more Nobel uh, Prize winners? Because when I when I look at who could have been a person that created ChatGPT, Nvidia, one of these, or who could have been a person who won a Nobel Prize in Indian. So, what do you think what is your opinion on why, like, most of what has happened in India is I see scaling up uh, inventions that have been done elsewhere. And because of our large population base, when we scale up those inventions, we get big companies and so on. But why hasn't primary innovation happened in our country?
Have no idea. I'll hazard a guess, but I probably start with the observation that look, none of the four of us are in India,
Well,
and
Chow is in India. You have a leg in India, and I would be okay with even like I would count it if Migs started Nvidia, I would count it as if it was an Indian Nvidia. But like I think, but yeah, please hazard your guess. Like I want to have a discussion on this, and I
uh,
have strong opinions about why it might be. But I
So
want to know what your
Vix,
opinions are.
by that logic, then Perplexity is an Indian startup. Is that right?
Sure, sure.
And
Perplexity is
that's going to be the big daddy that finishes Google off,
that
right?
might be, but I take that back. I don't like my personal theory is that we don't get these big companies in India because when I did my startup, I didn't go through placements and I did a startup at IIM Bangalore. I was so afraid of failing that I insured my failure. I was so afraid of failing that I ensured my failure. I was so afraid of the feeling that what will my professors think of me if I fail? What will my parents think of me if I fail? Oh, I actually had a couple of professors put money into my startup. Oh my God, I'm going to lose this professor 30,000 rupees, which sounded like a lot of money back then. And the how scared I was of failure actually ensured that I failed. So I think that's what it comes to when we talk about why don't we have great big companies doing something primary out of our country. But when it comes to why don't we win Nobel Prizes in physics? Why don't we do core IP work and chemical engineering and so on? Uh, and again, my father will get very upset at me because when I grew up, he always told me, "Beta, India ka culture बहुत अच्छा है. Indian culture is the best. Look at our culture." But I think instead of IQ, I think the answer is more cultural in nature. Uh, that would be my reading, and it's the culture of, for example, over here, even if somebody is very senior, I get to call them by their first name, and but over there back in India, like respect and authority and hierarchy that just mattered so much that that I didn't feel as free as I feel here to challenge ideas, to challenge because if it's coming from someone above me, it has to be right. So so I think it's more cultural. With but I'd like to hear what your opinion is on.
Quite likely. I certainly know that. Let's take our time when the majority of, say, the IITians would, by default, especially the good ones, apply to university in the US, not just for a master's but for a PhD, for a couple of reasons. One, they'd rather do a PhD, and secondly, it makes it cheaper for them. And then continue because the job scene looks so much more attractive. So, which means that, yeah, the environment in any case, culturally, economically, peer, whatever people you can bounce ideas off with, in all of those cases, it certainly has been better outside of India than in India. And I don't think people would deny that that's changing. I doubt if it's changed to the point where we can now say the current crop of people will start winning Nobel Prizes. I don't know when that will happen, or maybe it's happened. I have no idea. But completely agree that that cultural element must have been one of those things that drove people out. But I can probably see that people going out more visibly than the why they chose to go out.
Yeah, at least mix about perplexity. The guy is actually an IT Chennai graduate, right? The guy who started perplexity, and uh, and I think we will call him on podcast at some point. And what he might validate is what I felt, that when I left Bangalore and I came to Silicon Valley, it was just a change in culture that allowed me to do much better in Silicon. I was the same guy. It was practically the same idea. I was working less hard here. I was my employees were less focused, but we still did more. We still achieved more because there was something in the culture that was different. So I think
Isn't there a big element of self-selection, Viks? That some people, whether it's from IIT Madras, the people who are interested in doing a PhD, they'll go to Berkeley, they'll go to somewhere, and then they will stay there. And then there is the entire ecosystem that re- helps versus when you're comparing so far, and although these are building in India and elsewhere, I know in the last 10 years we've seen London build as a startup hub for Europe. In India, you've got two or three. I think Bangalore is there, Hyderabad, Gurgaon, Delhi is coming up or has come up in certain sectors a lot. I think it will take some time. It doesn't happen overnight. And my view is that around the time we were at IIM, that was the time when it was just starting. And whether it's ecosystem, whether it is people choosing to remain, as Anand was saying, if all the right people just go off to Berkeley or somewhere to do a PhD, who will get the Nobel Prize in India, right? Or who will do the perplexity in India, right? Then secondly, if people are choosing to stay and not go, versus like Chow, if people are choosing to come back, uh, I think that is what heralds a bigger change than what used to be before. Previously, no one questioned कि आप जा रहे हो अगर आप यूएस जा रहे हो वापस क्यों आओगे. Right now people are actively questioning that कि वापस जाना चाहिए या नहीं जाना चाहिए, because there are pros and cons of both. And sometimes some of us, and I know for myself and I know a lot of others, sometimes when we settle here, we get rooted because of the kids,
yeah.
and then it's very difficult to move at least until there. So there are other reasons, not because India isn't an attractive location anymore, but just the way it is. And I think our comparison set of India in the 90s that we've seen on entrepreneurship and startup versus India in the 2020s, I think it's quite different.
I agree. It's kind of one full generational shift, right? If you look at it over the 25, 30 years. And I have seen students, as I mentioned in one of the earlier episodes, I regularly engage with IMB in the admission interviews. Right? And I see a lot of students, at least in the panel, which I generally am part of from IIT Madras, and who are appearing for the MBA admission. And the kind of things that they have done now before joining, before attempting cat and all are way way beyond than we would have ever considered. And the uh, entrepreneurship, the ability to just go out, uh, engage with professors globally, do projects, so much. And Anand, you are teaching at Madras, you would be seeing that firsthand. It's just so crazy.
True.
And
And
and they find it normal. But I mean, we one generation earlier, we think it's just too much, but it is normal for them. And I think, Mix, as you mentioned, uh, over some time, we will start seeing those results as the whole generation grows up in that environment.
I think, and this is a guess again, it will take another stage for this to take off. And let me explain with an example what I mean.
Hmm.
We hire people not from the IITs, but from tier 2, tier 3 colleges as well. And there are some basic issues like if let's say we're hiring a developer, the guy does not know how to solve the problem and needs to reach out for help, they will not. Why? That requires two skills which are quite tough. One, the courage to say, I don't know. The second, to verbalize clearly the kind of help that they need. Neither of which is something that is being taught in a systematic way. In contrast, with let's say a fresh engineering graduate from a tier 2 or a tier 3 college in the UK or in the US or Singapore, would very comfortably be able to do both of those. So I guess there's part cultural, part educational. So which means that these people that are coming out with the wealth of experience that you mentioned, Chavan, rightly so, right? There are some of these people who are doing some extremely incredible things. When they start recruiting a team of 5 or 6 people beyond the core team, they find that it's hard, and then they say, oh, I'm not getting good people, as opposed to say if they were in Silicon Valley. And this is one element of the ecosystem that starts supporting them. I'm sure there'll be a whole other bunch of ecosystems that will support them as well. Not that I believe that this is necessarily a hard problem to solve. It may take some time, few years, few decades, whatever.
I think you hit the nail on the head. Uh, there are cultural differences, and for us, for instance, understanding those differences is important because if we have to, uh, for instance, recruit talent from India, when I see it, some of my startup companies always do this because it's relatively cheaper talent in India or Eastern Europe versus if you hire a software engineer in London. And my advice for most of these industry company CEOs has been that you have to recognize that you have to behave slightly differently because those people they might be as talented, but for instance, in the level of first week hand holding has to be done differently. I'm not saying less or more. Usually it's slightly more, but it's in a different way. You cannot say, I'm going to hire Indian talent, but I'm going to apply London culture or San Francisco culture on that Indian talent. No, sorry, you can't have your cake and eat it too. You have to
Very true.
understand, and it's not just Indian talent. I mean, if you're saying I'm going to get manufacturing done, I'm outsourcing my manufacturing to Guangdong, right? And instead of having a factory out here in Northampton. Of course, there will be a different set of people who are doing that, and you have to just understand that people are different, cultures are different, processes are different.
And it's something that, I mean, even being in India, it's not something that we necessarily appreciate. We had a colleague, for instance, smart guy, good developer. I get a call one night, and he's staying in the guest house, which is just a few minutes away from where I stay. At around 10 in the night, I get a call from an unknown number. And this girl says, so sorry to disturb you. Am I talking to Anand, CEO of Gramner? I say, yeah. She says, I'm this guy's fiance. He's not picking up his phone, and I'm a bit worried that he's done something stupid. Could you please just go check if he's still there? Okay, that sounds a little scary. What do you think happened? He said, no, we had a very tough argument. I honestly am worried that he's committed suicide. Okay, panic, run all the way there, bang on the door, not even ring the doorbell. The guy opens. I said, okay, so are you okay? What happened? He said, what do you mean? What happened? "No, I got a call from your fiance. Shit, okay. Sorry to trouble you with all of this. That's fine. What happened? And he tells me his story. Great guy, communicative, and all of that. Come from an agricultural family. His family has debts. His father's a farmer and has been very concerned that their son has not been sending them enough money to cover the debts and believes that the son is throwing away all his money in the city, living a luxurious life. Whereas he says, look, not only, I mean, I barely eat, I'm sending away everything so that we can at least make the installments. And this is just mounting up day in and day out. And I scream every day. Sometimes I worry that the neighbors would hear the noise. I hope you haven't heard any complaints. He says, that opened up a completely new world to me. And if I, working with this person in the same environment that he is, am blind to this kind of a problem, how will someone be able to outsource to India without having this kind of, I mean, how does one even know that this is something that could exist? And this is not an uncommon story, by the way.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And there are so many also what you mentioned, and there's so many regional differences. And I find myself quite lucky growing up in India that I realized. And for me, Bangalore, I am Bangalore was the first time I started realizing that in the level that uh, I grew up in Delhi all my life, right? And for holidays, it used to be Shimla, Chandigarh, Mussoorie. It was very rarely anything south of the Midwest, right? एक बार पहुंच गए Mumbai, but that was about it. And then come to Bangalore, stay there for 2 years, and for me it was like, okay, these guys from Chennai behave very differently from what I'm used to with people. Even the smallest things, कि किसी को आपने बी या एम से बोल दिया, so they might think कि वो actually mean कर रहा है versus colloquially निकल रहा है for some people, right? So I think it was mutual for a lot of people around. It wasn't just me. A lot of us realized that different people from different regions in India are culturally, and they think differently. And that's why I find myself lucky that when I've been abroad, whether as a tourist or in now living in London and so on, I've been able to assimilate that with the basic assumption. Even if I don't know how that person is different from me, my starting point is I know that person is culturally different from me. It doesn't matter. Could be a British guy, could be an American guy, could be whoever. I know they're different, and that's I see many people don't have that realization, and they think one rule applies to everyone.
It's hard.
So I just want to take one step back. And you mentioned about this ability to seek help and being able to articulate the help that is needed. And one of the things which we have seen, so I've been running this startup called Peak Mind for about 4 years now. And that is one of the biggest differences, or I would say, so we have practically started treating it as a competitive strength in among students, because it's again amounting to the same thing. You are in class, but then if you haven't understood it, you are afraid to ask, right? It's an extension of the same, I would say, inability to take that support, or even go to the teacher outside of class and seek clarification and so on. So I just wanted to show something. It's probably a little like a plug, but let me just show one of the charts that we use. Let me know if you're able to see this.
Not yet. It's coming up. Yes.
So if you see the chart at the right, basically we have
Hmm.
broken. So we call it the CQ. It's complete quotient similar to IQ, EQ, and so on. And we identified six parameters. And I would love to kind of run the data with you, given that you are so deep in data. So maybe
Sure.
I'll take your help on that. But basically, these are six parameters which we found with
Hmm.
global research and data from almost 50,000 students that we ran this on.
Hmm.
That parameters which matter apart from the academic subject, right? And the
Hmm.
support system is the one that we were just talking about, just
Yeah.
to uh,
I'd love to test a hypothesis that seems to emerge from this, which is it that the productive students actually end up taking less help than their peers? I can see why that might be the case because, well, they know more than their peers, so what are they going to ask them? But it may also develop into a behavior that they know
yes,
stuff and therefore assume that they cannot ask. Who knows?
possible. I mean, we look at these six as kind of independent qualities, but yes, what you are
Hmm.
saying is also a hypothesis to check. And so the way we explain the outcomes is that okay, this is what the mirror shows you, and depending on whether you want to work on your blind spots or whether you want to work on your strengths to strengthen them further, you accordingly have something to work on. It's giving you some data points that okay, and this is
Yeah,
what can cause a delta movement.
this is neat.
Yeah.
One of
I
the
think
things that
it summarizes things a lot. A lot of data points together, both visually, but I'm thinking from the user perspective. And
Hmm.
I'm pretty sure from the user perspective, after the first one or two times, they can read through charts like this, all these webs and all, and see how they can improve beyond
Right.
just, of course, beyond your inputs and your app and your people, how they can help them. Even people can self introspect. कि मैं कहाँ पे हूँ. Sorry,
Yes.
Anand, you were saying something.
yeah, no, I was just thinking that uh, the support system, at least from what I've seen and what I just mentioned as well, breaks up into the willingness and the ability to
Correct.
ask for
Both
help.
of them. Yes.
Right. And the willingness seems to be the major bottleneck in that the majority of
Correct.
the people that I know seem unwilling. But for the minority that are willing, the ability is a gap too. And oddly enough, let me tell you what I tell a reasonable number of such people who reach out for help. Look, imagine there is a rubber duck sitting in your desk. Explain your problem to that rubber duck. By the time you've explained the problem, you probably would have found the solution. Because a big part of it is just verbalizing. And that habit, as opposed to just keeping it in one's head, the habit of explaining what the problem is or writing it down or whatever, seems to be a big gap. And I think, this is again a guess, that the emergence of ChatGPT and the likes of it is a big help in that regard. Earlier, people used to put in their questions in some forum. That in itself was helping. But now I have a personal assistant that I can ask the question
Correct.
to.
Correct.
Uh,
Without
uh,
the fear of any judgment, I think that is the biggest bottleneck that people have. Right.
Correct. And they will be forced to learn prompt engineering, and arguably, prompt engineering is nothing more than eloquent expression. So,
Yes.
I think so, and I don't know how this. So just yesterday, I was discussing with an ex-classmate of mine about prompt engineering and ChatGPT, and he's become a disbeliever in ChatGPT because of all the hallucinations and some crappy stuff that he's got. He's like, this is all bullshit and rubbish. And I was trying to help him understand that there's something called prompt engineering. And as we were discussing, uh, where we led to is, see, our generation and maybe generation. So what we were discussing earlier is you need to know how different people are different, get work done from them as a manager, and so on. That defines. rather than कि किसको ज़्यादा statistics आती है, किसको ज़्यादा balance sheet आती है. While those are important, beyond a point, it's about how you can manage your team and play in a team that becomes important for professional success. And now, explaining to your teammate is now transferring into, because your teammate is ChatGPT or any other LLM. So explaining to them कि मैं ये करना चाहता हूँ, अब मुझे ऐसे बताओ, और मुझे इस एंगल से सोच के बताओ, अच्छा तुमने वो वाला आंसर गलत दिया है, सो अब थोड़ा सा ये वाला जस्ट जस्ट मूव इट हियर. नाउ दोज आर द काइंड ऑफ फाइन ट्यूनिंग. उसको मॉडल में jargon डाल के मॉडल फाइन ट्यूनिंग बोल सकते हो, बट इट्स द सेम थिंग हाउ यू एक्सप्लेन टू अ कलीग और योर टीम.
Oh, spot on. I am curious though, this friend of yours, was he using ChatGPT Plus or the vanilla ChatGPT, the paid version or the unpaid one?
He actually was using a GPT 4 or 3.5 or a turbo or something like that, but he gave up. So that's why he's like, कि अब मैं क्यों पैसे दूँ इसके. Very coincidentally, that guy is based in Singapore. So I don't know. I mean, it's Singapore में he बैठा है, and yesterday I was speaking to him.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I noticed in Anand's blog there is a specific entry around how you are making ChatGPT speak lesser and give
Mhm.
clearer answers, right? So it may be useful for you to share that,
Show
Migs.
it on the screen. Let me also have a look. What's the
Yeah, this was basically me getting fed up with ChatGPT giving long explanation. Because I don't have time, bus answer de do.
yeah, yeah,
Now, arguably, there's been a certain amount of research that's gone into when long answers help. Simple questions, short answers are fine. Complex
yeah.
questions, long answers help it get to the right answer. So
Yeah.
I've recently modified the prompt to uh, to
So
well,
Yeah.
say literally that. But yeah, the theme is this that the way an LLM works is simply by generating the next token. And it really is doing nothing more than speak what comes into its head based on all of the training that it has. And I've noticed this for myself sometimes.
Hmm.
After a certain amount of rambling, I
Hmm.
kind of figure out what I want to say. And therefore,
Hmm.
when people ramble to me, I don't stop them as much. I said, okay, let them ramble. It's basically
Hmm.
them helping them figure out what they want to say. ChatGPT and any of the LLMs have that kind of behavior for complex problems. They need to ramble a bit. And this prompt, think step by step, does that. It gives them a structure to ramble in so that by the end of the sequence, it's kind
Yeah.
of gotten to where it needs to.
So he's got a smell test question, which he says that there is very little opinion judgment. It is as fact based. Uh, so he's based in Singapore. He runs a few Airbnb and he's growing that business in Bali. Uh, and
Hmm.
his smell test question is, um, what is the antipode of Bali? And he's saying that
Okay.
you can't get that wrong. Otherwise, what use is
Correct.
ChatGPT? And for him, it gives him, usually, as he was saying, that it gives him something which is on the, I think, below the equator. So he's like, I know it can't be below the equator. It has to be slightly above the equator. So something like that. And anyway, long story short, I did that myself on ChatGPT. I phrased it in my way, and it gave what I think was the perfect answer. So hopefully, I was able to convince him that maybe you were doing it either wrong or maybe it's improved now. But for him, yeah, so it's all these near factual questions, right? I call them near factual because, I mean, it's based on fact, but then there is a judgment or an understanding on does it understand what's an antipode? And
Good point.
can it pull that out? Um, yeah,
I'm just
right, Chow.
doing a quick check to see what my version of ChatGPT gives and what Bard gives me. So on ChatGPT, given that I put in the custom instructions that Chow has on the
Hmm,
screen, one of
hmm,
which is things step by step, it
hmm.
went through and said the antipode of a location is a location directly opposite to it. To
Yeah,
find the antipode of Bali, you subtract 90 degrees if it's
that's
north,
what
change the land.
ChatGPT gave me. because I said I'm trying to understand antipodes. Now tell me what is the antipode of Bali, and it explained to me that logic. And I'll also tell
Correct.
you, before that I tried perplexity, which is also similar kind of, it's pulling it. I just said what is the antipode of Bali, and perplexity gave me somewhere in Venezuela, versus with these calculations it should be in the Atlantic off the west coast of Africa, somewhere there.
Hmm. And Gemini does get it wrong to begin with. It
Gemini की तो
begins by
बात ही
saying,
नहीं करते. Gemini would probably give it. It has to be in Africa because they want to make it as if it has to be a black person, right?
well, and this is interesting all the more because I'm using Gemini Advanced,
Right.
not the basic
Okay.
one. So it begins by saying it's located in the Amazon rainforest,
Hmm.
roughly within the borders of Brazil, Colombia, and Peru,
Right.
which again I'm guessing is in the south, which probably
That
ought not to be possible.
that's what perplexity also gave, which
Ah,
was the basic one. But ChatGPT, once you say, then it gives you that calculation, right? That for
ah,
so many degrees south, it has to be so many degrees north, and for the
ah.
longitude, you add 180, which is actually what you want to do. That's all.
Exactly. I'm
Hmm.
also trying it on GPT 3.5 Turbo to see
Hmm.
what that gives. And yeah, it just says what Gemini said. It's in the Atlantic Ocean near the border of Brazil and Colombia, which arguably is not too bad. At least it's not saying it's in Brazil and Colombia.
Right.
It's but
Yeah.
yeah, clearly. And that is one of the observations that Ethan Mollick, one of the fairly famous personalities in the space, has been
Hmm.
talking about. He says he's been talking to people and across different segments, both knowledgeable researchers, laymen. He finds that only about 5% of people are
Hmm.
using ChatGPT Plus or GPT-4 as
Right.
opposed to 3.5. And there is a substantial difference in quality between these
Right.
models.
Even versus GPT 3.5 Turbo?
Yeah, 3.5 currently is only offered as turbo, not
Yeah.
as the even older
Right, right,
model.
right. Of course, yeah.
And yeah, therefore, you're right, between 3.5 turbo and 4. And a significant portion of their beliefs and what you mentioned earlier, the problems with hallucinations, are things that would vanish once they go to 4. Not entirely, but
Hmm.
significantly.
Hmm.
And this gap in itself
Hmm.
is leading to a reasonable number of people to use LLMs less than perhaps they otherwise would.
Right, right, right. I mean, so again, I mean, there's one test. I think I'm going to use antipode of Bali or something as one smell check to test out.
Yeah,
I mean, my friend was saying that he was using four, and he got an answer which is South Brazil, which is like, यार अगर तुम globe पकड़ के भी देख लो हो ही नहीं सकता. It is just impossible. But anyway, I think that highlights this prompt engineering. How do you pose the question? And for me, again, we were talking about how do you explain it to your team? How do you get your subordinates to actually be motivated? Uh, I think in GPT or any AI, I think that motivation will also come in a different way, not in a human way, but in a different way. You have to explain why you're doing something and give it a bit more context. Um, and to me, and this is such a recent conversation. Um, I think GPT or most of these LLMs, they are at what I classify as they're at a 10-year-old type of thing. I mean, they've reached there in like 2 years, but even whether
hmm,
it's GPT-4, so they are learning. And there's a lot of learning that's still going on how do people ask. And sometimes they will lie because they don't know or they haven't searched hard enough, or maybe your question was unclear.
correct.
But for a human, that 10-year-old will take 10 years to reach a 20-year-old's level of intellectual capability.
Yeah.
For an LLM, it will take probably 3 months or 6 months. So it's happening very quickly as we speak. So that's what
And
I think it's about the speed, and it's not there, but it will be there very quickly.
and the powerful thing is once it gets there, every newborn LLM will automatically be a 20-year-old at least.
Yes, that's true. That's true. Anything that you define of that is very well said. Chow, you were talking about the blog.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
this is what I use. Uh, yeah, sorry, Chow, maybe you want to scroll down a little bit, or no, I'll leave it to you.
No, so I was just mentioning, I quickly browsed through this while we were waiting to start, and found this really interesting. And the way you have captured the things that you mentioned about it rambling before it comes to a conclusion, right? So
Seriously.
that's something. Now that I look back at it, it's very common, but you
Hmm.
don't actually realize that till it is pointed out. So, but some of
Now,
these
the
instructions are very, very useful. I mean, like do not hedge or qualify, do not waffle. I mean, being stating that upfront will really cut down on so much text that it otherwise pushes out.
correct. The one that surprised me the most and has had the most influence in my way of thinking is the last paragraph here. So I shared a common GPT Plus account with my daughter,
Hmm.
and I did a comparison of the kinds of conversations she was having versus the kind of conversation that I was having. And what I noticed was when I just look at the size of the conversations, the top five conversations by size in terms of number of words were hers. So I looked at it. She asked one question, then another question, another question. Whereas I ask a question, get the answer, move on to the next conversation, ask another question, and get the answer. So I said, look, why would you not? Why do you want to retain the context? Why do you keep asking question after question? And her response was, when you get an answer, don't you get 10 questions in your head? How can you not ask a follow up question? At which point I realized, shit, I'm old.
Yeah.
It just does not happen. So that and if you scroll up a little bit out to the earlier one, one of those instructions, yeah, there it is, suggest follow-up prompts for open-ended inputs, was something that I gave it as a custom instruction to help me get to that level of curiosity. And boy, oh, does this help. I probably use it only 2% of the time, in the sense that I actually follow up only 2% of the time, but it is always helpful in getting me to think.
I think, Anand, that's probably why you're able to get so much work done and write blogs and do everything, because I've realized uh, Perplexity, ChatGPT, and a few others that I keep using, that follow up question is what traps me, because I get so many questions, and then I, even though now my original question is answered, I can get on with my work because that's what I really wanted to know. But then it triggered something. Okay, why don't I find this out? And then it's an endless thought, and before I know it, 45 minutes of my life have gone. Of course, I've come out feeling less curious, or maybe more curious, because now I have even more questions to ask. But it's a trap. I feel like it's like a low productivity trap for me.
Very true.
That's
Very
that.
true.
That's how you are boosting their revenue. Also makes remember that.
Mm. No, I only did do it in the free version. All these things with Perplexity or free version and all that. There is no token system, and thankfully they have limits. But I don't think I almost ever cross those limits. So this is like, anyways. About Viks, did you see this prompt engineering? We've discussed it before, and Anand's thoughts about the on the blog.
No, I haven't read that yet. No.
Hmm. Yeah, we
Yeah,
were
so
talking
Uh,
about.
it is quite interesting in terms of being able to articulate, help ChatGPT articulate it sharper. So yeah, really.
so, I don't know if you guys might have already discussed it, but what I found helpful is that every time ChatGPT gets a chance to put a token, that's how it gets to think. Like ChatGPT doesn't get to say, "Look, I'm gonna go to the corner for 2 minutes or timeout. Like, give me 2 minutes to think before I give an answer." ChatGPT basically every time it puts a token, that's when it gets getting to think. So asking ChatGPT to explain its reasoning or allowing it to write more, the more you allow it to write, the more it can think. So that was an interesting perspective. Uh, did you guys read about this? That a physicist had written a PhD thesis. So he had posed a problem in quantum physics, And then his thesis was a solution to that problem. And he worked for 4 years to come up with the solution to that problem. And the thesis wasn't published yet. So, as an experiment, he gave his the quantum physics problem that he posed, that he started his thesis with, to an LLM. And he asked the LLM, how do you solve the problem? And he was surprised that the LLM actually gave the answer to that. So, I do think that at the end of the day, we will have an objective based AI. Objective based AI means will pose a question to it. It will understand, okay, this is my objective, and then it will be able to craft the whole answer at once instead of saying, I will. My answer is made up of the next word only. So that's how we humans do it, right? We have an objective, and then we take some milliseconds or seconds and craft an answer instead of saying every time I say a word, it's not like I'm I only I don't think far ahead only for the next word. I think far ahead at least for the next couple of minutes of my objective. So I do think that we'll have objective based AI instead of for the whole question itself instead of going token by token.
Anand, I'll
But
just add one thing. So this all this discussion about prompt engineering, I knew a bit of theory 6 months ago, but it was only in December when Viks and I were online making the logo. If you see the logo on the right, this is generated from ChatGPT, and we were
Ah,
doing it
neat.
online, and this was back in December, I think, and Vix was like really stating out the problem, and that's where I realized for the first proper time. I mean, I read about it कि होता है अच्छा देना लाइक यार इसलिए मेरे आंसर इतने बेकार आते हैं और ये तो बहुत ही मतलब बढ़िया लोगो बन के आ रहे हैं मैंने भी ट्राई किया हुआ है कुछ नहीं बनता है ऐसे उसके and I must say कि last 2-3 months that's what I've been also realizing yeah, that is the thing you just go towards that and let people develop those llms you just make sure that you have the right either it's prompt engineering or the right proprietary data which you can pull out and run your own mini or tiny llms. So Anand, actually that's a nice segue. So tell us about a bit more after IIM, your journey. Your daughter, as I'm doing some rough maths, your daughter, you probably had your daughter when you were about 5 years out of IIM or something like that. So back in BCG days, and so tell us your professional and personal journey post IIM. Uh, when you married, what you were doing in BCG, where it started off, and you've given us a summary. I mean, you were doing consulting, of course, but what type of projects were these? Coming out of IIM, what did you learn, and what new things did you learn that you didn't know as an MBA graduate?
So, post IIM, the de facto choice was investment banking or consulting. And I had my summers at Lehman. I realized investment banking is not for me. I unfortunately did not have the benefit of a consulting internship because if I had, I would have realized consulting is not for me either. Software is for me. And it took me some time to figure that out. But yeah, I mean, like I said earlier, it was a series of mistakes beginning with me joining IIT and then leaving IBM to join IIM. Leaving IIM to join BCG instead of a software firm was yet another one in that series of mistakes. Made it. And I got married about a year into BCG. My mom basically said, look, 26 is when you get married. You're graduating when you're 26, so you get married. No, 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 one more year, one more year. Okay, ठीक है, chalo. And then she said, okay, here's whom you're marrying. Great, done. Life is very simple because I
Okay,
don't get to meet.
so did mom choose your wife or did you?
Technically, I chose my wife,
Oh,
but I was
technically,
given
got it.
a narrow portfolio that meets my horoscope,
Hmm.
and the total number of such matches were apparently extremely rare, so or very low. Okay, fine, whatever. As long as I don't have to do the running around. Thank you for that.
And this was the time you were in BCG doing consulting, and I'm guessing maybe traveling a lot as a consultant, or did you have more of a?
Luckily, not too much. The only travel that I had to do, but for a short trip to the US, was between Bombay and Delhi, and
Right.
occasionally to Bangalore. So, not
And
too
what
much
sort
by
of
way of travel.
sectors, what sort of projects were you doing? Tell us a bit more about that.
Mostly financial services, because BCG at that point was led by the financial services practice was led by Janmay Sinha, and he was very much into. He had several contacts in the banking sector, so we were working with the likes of ICICI, several public sector banks like Punjab National Bank, and so on. And that's most of what I was doing. I knew nothing whatsoever about banking, and this was a great learning opportunity. And it was actually solid experience that way. Played around, looked at various sectors within banking, but at some point I figured I do like IT, so at least let me get into an IT project. That was not trivial because we didn't have any IT projects. So James Abraham, who was one of the partners who was more on the IT side in Delhi, had just about landed a project with Oracle to do some sales consulting for them. He said, okay, I need to be on this project. So I call up James and say, James, keep me in mind. He said, okay, sure, except this is in Delhi and we'll see. Fine. Day is approaching. The kickoff is supposed to happen a day. The next day, no word from James. So, okay, fine. The next day morning, I call up James and say, James, I'm at the Bombay airport and I have in my hand a ticket for the Delhi airport. Should I get on the flight? He laughed and said, okay, if you're that desperate, then Ajay. And that's how I wormed my way into the first IT project that we did. And
That's quite
slowly it's
surprising because in the noughties, we're talking about early noughties when India was like coming up as a tech um, ecosystem was starting and all that, and BCG had no IT projects at that time or very few.
uh, so BCG had started, and
Hmm.
when I joined, I was what, less than 50 members in the team.
Right.
So it was not very much an entrenched presence at that point. In fact, the bulk of your batch, our batch, they are the senior partners in the system today, and that's effectively how it was at that time.
You know, that
And
answers one of the questions I've always had is back in the mid noughties, I used to be in a firm called Accenture. Back in the time when Accenture did still a lot of strategy consulting and all that. And most of my ex colleagues who are still in the consulting world, most of them have jumped onto BCG in the last 5 or 10 years. I'm like, ये सारे के सारे BCG कैसे पहुंच गए? Now it answers that question.
सब अपने ही लोग हैं. No, that
So,
is part of
Anand,
it, of course.
I've never worked in consulting, but I've been told that a consultant takes your watch and then tells you the time. Uh, what's your experience with consulting? How much of a value add is it to enterprises?
See, you're talking about a good consultant. I was not a good consultant. I would even get the time wrong from your watch. You'll have to also distinguish that. When I was a consultant, I realized a couple of things. Firstly, I am not consulting. The partner is consulting, and I am the partner's research assistant, associate, slide deck producer, whatever, which is a fantastic learning experience. It's also a great way to move up the curve, but I'm not consulting. So in a way, that's good for the client because the client is at least getting better expertise than from someone like me. Having said that, a significant chunk of the interactions that the client team members have, not necessarily the main stakeholder, are with people like me. And we ask more questions than give answers. So that perception has a basis. Just why is this guy coming and asking 200 questions about my industry when he's going to go tell my boss stuff that's based on what I said? That part of the perception or where it comes from has a basis. Does it really add value? I don't think I could have answered this when I was at BCG, but now that I'm outside of BCG, I at least can partially answer it by saying, yeah, I would hire a consulting firm because
You
I've
would.
seen I would hire a consulting firm.
Okay.
Knowing that people like me would be
Mm,
on the other side, there is still value. Why is that? Just outsourced, clear headed thinking.
mm,
Management needs to be outsourced as well. And there is a pool of good management capabilities sitting out here in some of these. Why would I not hire? then I need some excess capacity at some point. If I have an initiative, it makes sense. Second, why would I not hire somebody who has a perspective that is outside in rather than inside out? We sit and discuss the same bloody problems and make the same bloody mistakes. The first 3 months when a person enters our organization, they are fantastic. And we try and use them as much as possible in those first 3 months, because after that, they're house trained, done for. Now, here is a pool that not only consistently thinks outside in, but also brings benchmarks from elsewhere and forces us. Having said that, there is also the potential, valid or otherwise, of using them as rubber stamping my opinion. Yes, they can be helpful for that. The sheer fact that I spend a lot of money on something makes it important for me, so I will do it. That's the same reason why I would go to a gym rather than exercising by myself. And it has some value. So those are there. I consider those lesser reasons to hire a consulting firm than the first two that I felt strongly.
And so the first two that you felt strongly was the outside in perspective. And what was the
And
second one? And that,
just
hey, when you spend money, the project itself becomes more important or the initiative becomes more important.
I believe that is a lesser reason too. Just that there is a pool of talented outsourced management thinking.
Yes, yes. No, I
If
think
I
you.
hire a developer,
Yeah, that was a
I
very
think that's a
concise
good
summary.
articulation.
Basically saying it's outsource. You outsource your strategy to someone rather than outsource a process to someone. Well, yeah, some consultants it's process also,
Yeah, I
but
mean, not necessarily fully outsource the strategy, but I think the part, Anand, which you mentioned is that management thinking talent pool is available, which can think differently or align depending on uh, what the situation is, and can help you see what you would otherwise not see because you are looking at it inside out.
exactly.
and I think there's
So I
one
would rather,
more thing. I think you touched upon it, and that I felt is it's not just there is an element of outside in, but between your first and second, I felt with most of my clients back in the consulting days that we were a lot of the information and the solutions are available within the organization. But what we
yeah,
were doing, partly because of our outside in perspective and partly being outsiders, where people were more willing to trust us than their colleague, where there might be some politics involved and so on, we were able to extract that, then put it together. That's where the outside in glue came in, rather than some new path breaking thought. It was the thoughts from the organization, which Vic says it was his watch that we were taking, but we knew how to read the time maybe in a better way that the organization was not able to. They were just seeing individual numbers, and we were able to see the whole watch and tell them the time.
very true. Happens all the time.
Who are your clients? Are these clients big enterprises who have a lot of data and asking you like, can you find me some trends in the data? Or is your client government organizations or states? Like, who are your clients primarily? Like, where does 80% of your revenue come from?
80% from corporates, but 20% from the likes of governments, and invariably large. The at least, but for our first few years, we haven't had many clients that were even medium enterprises, let alone small.
Give us a case study. Give us an interesting case study that this is the kind of client who comes to you. Is it like a shampoo seller in India coming to you and asking you which shampoo is selling more, or what should be the, can I increase the price of my shampoo? Are those the kind of questions that you've been asked to answer, or what are the
Yeah,
kind of questions you've been asked to answer?
that's a fairly typical question. In fact, let me take a real example. In our second year, we were working with a restaurant chain. This restaurant chain said, we have our data, we analyze it, we don't believe someone from the outside can tell us something from our data that we don't already know, but okay, you're asking for a chance, here's our data, tell me something that I don't know. I said, okay, we looked at the restaurant sales data, we said, okay, here's the kind of products that are making the most sale for you. They said, we know that. Okay, these are the restaurants and this is the kind of pattern of sale that they have. Yeah, we know that. So now we are getting a little desperate. We started looking at a few higher order analysis. and we started exploring which products sell well together. Now, we found that, for instance, there was a 93 or 95% correlation between tiffins and beverages. Guy has a dosa and orders a coffee or a tea after that. Great. Now we knew that they'll say yes, we know that already. We ourselves knew it, so no big deal. We also saw that one of those products that had a moderately high correlation with every other product category was desserts. Again, makes sense. People have whatever they have and they have desserts at the end. So, again, not a surprise. But what we found was surprising was there was a strong negative correlation between starters and most other products. The only exception was desserts. That didn't make sense. So we said, okay, last attempt. Can you explain this to us? Why is it that when people order starters, they're ordering less of everything else? The guys went into a huddle. They thought for a while. Blah, 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 blah. I have a feeling they knew why, but they didn't want to admit it amongst themselves. But after a little bit of discussion, they came back and said, "See, we have launched a new line of starters, and this was about a year ago. The idea was to price them very attractively, to have them at a very high quality, so that people will come in for the starters. They were going to be our loss leader, and they will consume the rest of it. What you're telling me is they come in, have the starters, eat the desserts, and leave. So it's become a loss maker for us, not a loss leader." Boss, okay, thank heavens. You didn't know this, right? I said, yeah, okay. And it moved on from there. One of the restaurants, we found that every Wednesday sales dips. The only reason we spotted it and they didn't was because we were looking at it from a day of the week perspective on a calendar based heat map rather than a line chart on which, along with the rest of the Saturday, Sunday weekly pattern, the Wednesday just completely vanished. Next, why is this particular restaurant losing sales every Wednesday? So they checked with the manager, and after a bit of investigation, they found out that that particular store has two counters, two tills, and the person running one of those tills takes half day off every Wednesday, has to go to some temple or whatever. Now, the manager who's looking at it from behind only sees the long queue, and he's very happy. But this is a restaurant which has a lot of other competing restaurants nearby. And when people see the long queue, they go to the other restaurants. They've been losing sales for 7 months without them knowing. In fact, the manager being very happy that on Wednesdays the queues are long, but having this kind of negative impact, which simply came from a different kind of visual representation. That's the
Wow.
kind of work that we do.
It's
Go
quite
ahead, Chow.
powerful and I mean very real world impact directly.
But then, only like you said, most of your customers are the big corporates, the big governments, very small and mid-size, and no small size. Now, I run a startup, and suppose in my startup, I have a lot of data, and I do some rudimentary analysis where, is my what's my cost of acquisition of a customer, what's my lifetime value of a customer, what is my annual customer, what's my retention rate, what's my dropout rate, and all that. Like 5 or 6 variables I track, but this kind of analysis that you're saying, how would a organization of say 50, 55 people uh, implement something like this internally? Like if say, uh, would you suggest that the way to do it is to hire someone whose only job is to visualize data, call him a data visualizer? Is the right way to do it is uh, give the data to ChatGPT, ask it to visualize data in different ways, and then look for the pattern and use your own brain to come up with, well, Wednesday the sales are not happening. How would you recommend a company which is less than 100 people to have to start generating insights like this within the organization? What would be your recommendation?
Let me hazard a guess at what might not be a good idea. Hiring a person is probably not a good idea because you probably don't have that many things for them to do. Outsourcing it is probably not a good idea, because by the time the person figures out and learns the context, if they ever do, it's going to take forever. What may be a better idea is to find someone in that team of 50 or 100 who is the most data savvy, and say, boss, freak out, and encourage them like crazy. In any pool of 10 people, one person is generally more curious about it, keen. They'll figure it out. I'm also learning that the question is far more important than the answer. In fact, many of our clients come to us and say, give me a dashboard. Our team happily takes that, executes that, and at the end of it, I don't know what we are delivering to the client. The client doesn't know what they're delivering to the client. And when I probe the team, have you asked him why he wants a dashboard? We did, but the project manager on their side said the users have just said, give me a dashboard. Okay, have you checked with the users? No, we can't break through the project manager. Okay, this is when you pull me in. Fine, I will break through the project manager. Come on, catch the project manager. Look, do you want to get fired after this project, or do you want to get promoted? Because if you want to get fired, take the random dashboard. If you want to get promoted, let's figure out what the user wants. Fine. We then go to the user who gives a very clear description of, here's my problem. I want an answer to this. At least 50% of the time. 50% of the time, the user doesn't know either. That's another story altogether. Or they say, give me some magic, whatever. But knowing that this is the problem that we want to solve, and here is how we will act on the outcome, requires so much thinking that it is rare, no question about it. If there is someone senior enough to say, yeah, have this problem, somebody take data and solve it. I'd say 80% of the job is done, the rest is just detail.
So again,
Understand,
I am.
Viks, just one thing. So we were recently trying to build a few dashboards in the company, and as you mentioned, just ask and one person to go crazy, build various views and so on. But again, it came down to, okay, what are the questions we want answers to, right?
Yes.
And once we articulated that, it was much more productive because then you could get those answers. Otherwise, you are getting some answers which may or may not help. Then it doesn't really serve the purpose. But now we are able to kind of so very interestingly, I'll give an example. So we have a feature where students are logging their mood on how they are feeling, right? And then we broke down the data into hourly time windows as to what proportion of students are logging at what time and so on. And we found that most students who are, let's say, logging their mood between 1 a.m. and 2 a.m., for example, are
Hmm.
in a terrible mood. Whereas people who are logging it at 6 in the morning or 7 in the morning are in a better mood, right? And when you think back at it, yes, it makes kind of sense. If someone is logging it at 2 in the night or 1:30 in the night, yes, they're wanting to blow off some steam, right? But what it also allowed us to do is identify what are the lean windows for us in terms of heavy data processing, right?
Hmm.
And then we figured that, okay, now our best slot is between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., where we can process all the cron jobs because students get active after 4 and they are active
Hmm.
till 2, right? So that's
That,
another piece which automatically came out. But yes, yeah, the primary thing was what kind of questions you are looking at answers for, and then the correct analysis for the data comes out.
what you mentioned actually answers three of the four questions that we recommend for any kind of data analysis. First, figure out who your audience is by name, not generic role. So in your case, it was whoever was leading the IT operations team, I guess. Second, be very clear on what the problem or what question you need answered. In this case, it is when should I run my cron jobs potentially, though it may not have been obvious upfront, but it emerges. Third, what action are you going to take when you get the answer? This is a part that a lot of people miss. They get the answer
Correct.
in some kind of vague structure. In this case, you need, if you say, look, tell me that I should run the job from this time to this time, great, I'll be able to do it. Don't say that in general, when people are in a happy mood, I should run the job. How am I supposed to figure that out? Right?
No, no. So
And
in our case, for example, the question that we were trying to get an answer to is what are the time slots where the students are most active on my app, so that if let's say I want to send out a notification that okay, why don't you
ah,
log your mood now? What are those time windows? And we figured that yes,
hmm,
evening 7 to 9 is the best time window for that, right? Which was fairly intuitive also, but yes, the data supported that. But these are some of the additional things which came out that okay, these are the time windows which work better. These the modes are tougher at that time. So maybe if you want to get more insights on bad moods, then you might want to push out a notification at 12 in the night that okay, if something is bothering you, come here and do this, right?
I think
So
that
exactly.
Chow, you probably thought like two steps more than most startups that I see or am involved with have done. Because by the time they start asking, like Anand was saying, they start asking the right questions. At least for me, I know what I'm going to do next at the next board meeting. Then I'm going to ask them what they are going to do next. With that answer, let's say you get the answer, and then the next iteration is the most effective or interesting one because then they reevaluate their questions and we all do it together. Like, why am I even asking this question? So the first thing is this is what I want on the dashboard, like you were saying. Then it's like, okay, why do you want that on the dashboard? And then what are you going to do with it? That last step, people start realizing
okay, did I really need that in the first place?
yeah, just because we think everyone is doing that, that's why we want to put it on the dashboard. It's simple things like as a startup, for instance. Uh, a lot of VCs ask how many users, what's your usage rate, and all those basic KPIs and metrics. And for some of these companies, even that metric is useless, or rather, well, it's nice to know. It's not the driving factor. So you ask a different question. If you have only three metrics to track, then what are those metrics going to be, and so on. So, but Anand, just very quickly coming back, and just so I understand what you're doing. Um, as your output product. Is it something similar to, say, a Tableau or a Power BI does, or is there an added layer on that?
So Tableau and Power BI are the products
Hmm.
that organizations use.
Right.
We sometimes, roughly about 20% of the time, use a product like Tableau or Power BI to answer a client's problem. Or put another way, we set it up potentially on a Tableau or Power BI. 80% of the time, or closer to what, 60% of the time, we use our own platform to create something like Tableau and Power BI do. And the reason we are unable to use, say, a Tableau or a Power BI or any other tool is because they don't have that capability. So we had to build our own platform, which we released as open source. The idea was
Okay.
not that
What's the name
it
of
was
the
a product.
platform, Anand?
Gramex,
Okay.
which
Is it on GitHub?
which it is on GitHub. Yes,
How
you
many
can just
Are
stars
search
you
for
does
it.
it
going to
have?
productize it at all, revenue wise, or you open sourced
Uh,
it, so no point?
So there is an enterprise version, and the prime reason we had an enterprise version was we thought we would go the product route. Then we figured we absolutely don't have the DNA for it. The open source version probably has 100 stars or so, nothing more than that. We've largely been using it as an accelerator for our work. And the naming of the platform is also a story. I should actually tell you how Gramner got its name.
Right.
We started off as six stroke seven of us got together and we started ideating on what we should do. We listed out 22 industries and said, look, somewhere among these industries we should be working because these are all attractive industries. And after a lot of management consulting like work, we narrowed down to rural BPO and energy management. Gram Ener. The domain name was available. We registered the company And then a year and a half later, we realized that rural BPO has no money in it. Energy management required us to put in working capital of 200 odd crores. So neither of which was for us. But in the process, we entered data analytics, and that's another story which is fun as well. But after we got into it, we said obviously the existing tools are not serving some of the needs that we have, and we've got to build something for sheer lack of choice. What do we call it? And everybody was looking at each other. None of us are good at naming stuff. So I said, look, I've got to commit the report today. I've got to give it some name. So I'm just going to say gram X and you replace it with something. 10 years later, it still hasn't been replaced.
Very interesting.
So,
And there's more interesting story than Google and Google.
Yeah.
so Anand, you were telling me that there are four things. One, get the name of the stakeholder, not the some vague. It's like Manish Chaudhary, he's the stakeholder. Get him. What is the question you're trying to answer? Instead of like, and the question cannot be give me a pretty graph because pretty graph doesn't do anything. So and then once you get the data, ask them what will you do with the data, what outcomes you want to drive, and what was the fourth question that you want answer to?
What is the impact? How much will you save?
How much will you save?
And
How
if
much
they
will you earn?
exactly, what is the
because
impact? Quantify. And it doesn't have to be dollars, but quite often it is. And if you can't figure that out, you have no basis for prioritization nor basis for value realization.
So, so tell me, like in a startup that I am working on. But then the next thing is I have multiple databases where this data resides, and the data is not going to be simple. Like you just can't run a SQL query and get the data. So does your team then also do the tooling to get this data?
That is what we do. And at that stage is when it makes sense to hire somebody from the outside because you know what you're doing and why you're doing it. And yeah, their specialist expertise helps. Yes.
So
And is that where you were saying that Power BI can't do everything? Is that where the Power BI type of thing starts failing? And of course, because you've got different data sources, and from my limited experience, it doesn't pop as easily. I mean, you need to actually hire like those good old days of ERP consultants. You need a Power BI consultant, anyways, to do all the work for you.
You would, if it is possible in Power BI, you'd need a Power BI consultant. And
Yeah,
Power BI actually, like Tableau or any others, is actually pretty good at talking to multiple data sources, putting it together, and so on.
right.
What it may not do in the hands of someone naive is do it fast. If you have a bunch of Excel sheets,
Yeah,
100 Excel sheets, and you need to put them together, not a problem. Power BI can do a fantastic job of it. If those are databases, each with let's say 100,000 rows, and you have a dozen of those, then it starts getting sluggish enough that the user will have to sit and wait for 2 minutes, and that breaks the flow of thought. So at that point, you need a data engineer.
So, do you also do the implementation, or are you only the consulting layer where you only help people work through these four questions and come to answers? So, do you also have engineers on your team who will actually do the implementation?
We are actually the opposite. We are mostly the implementation layer, and out of necessity, we have gotten into, and a little bit of hoping that we can move up the value chain, gotten into consulting. Consulting is probably 5% of our revenue or
And
less.
who is hiring you? Is it these organizations that is hiring you, or is it BCG that's hiring you? Because I'm sure BCG is already is trying to answer these four questions and then saying, "Well, we don't know how to implement it. So, do we get Gramener?"
Absolutely. No, it's not the consultants who hire us, it's the organizations who hire us. And in some cases, the consultants have worked directly with the organization to define those questions, some cases not. But we don't, barring few exceptions, work with the consultants.
So, give us some idea of some thumb rule numbers, like. And again, I'm thinking of very context specific to myself. Uh, what would it cost to get someone like you working on a project? Like, what does it cost?
Not very different from hiring a person or a few people to solve the problem. There are two ways in which you could do this. If you have a queue of problems, then you need a pod, effectively a retainer of sorts, where you're looking more for the skills. If you have a specific problem, then you need a project. And the cost of that, so let's say it's a 3-person month project, it's not very different from hiring three consultants for 3-person months. The
What's the
way in
cost of
which you
hiring? what is the cost of hiring three consultants for three? I don't know because I've never hired a consultant.
If you're hiring somebody offshore, then it can be anywhere from 7K to 10K dollars per person month.
person month
And
is
I'm talking about a
10 to
data
10K
scientist
dollars.
because, yeah,
Okay.
and that's mainly because data scientist costs have just
Right.
started going up the roof like crazy, especially post COVID. And you don't only want a data scientist; you invariably also want a business analyst. In fact, you may want a business analyst more than the data scientist or data engineer, but the cost is about the same, or maybe about 1K less.
Okay, so how does it typically work? Well, a client say put $50,000 in a retainer account, and then you guys will bill against that retainer account, with the idea being
Closer to
that
that,
yeah,
yeah, more like an annualized contract, say 500K to a mil that we draw down over the course of a year or so.
okay,
And either as part of that or in some cases outside of that, run special projects in the organization. It usually
okay.
starts with projects because they're small enough that you could say, look, yeah, here's 50K, here's 100K, let's get a piece of work done that I have a problem with. But it's really saying, can you work with me? Can you be the partner that constantly solves a queue of problems that I might have? And we filter for organizations that will have a queue because it doesn't give us as much ROI investing in an organization that has only a small pool of problems that we solve.
And what does your sales cycle look like, and how big is your sales team? Can you talk a little about that? Because I'm sure there are a lot of companies uh, which which find it very difficult to sell into enterprises.
Yeah, it is a long cycle. We got lucky partly because we started in India and partly because the nature of our work, which was especially focused on the visualization side, by and large sold itself, meaning people would look at it and say, oh, yeah, I want it. I don't know what you're doing, but that looks cool. I want to show it to my boss and it helped. So, because of that, the early sales cycles would be 3 months ish, which, of course, the product world would be long, but in the enterprise world is dramatically fast. And these days, now that we've moved up the value chain, it's taking closer to 6 months on average.
And how big of a sales team do you have?
Not very large. We have only two people who are dedicated sales. The founders, of course, do a reasonable amount of sales themselves. And we have account managers who work with our larger accounts and mind the accounts. So there's what, half a dozen account managers plus, well, four founders who provide additional sales muscle, but two salespeople full time.
Okay, which is very different from America, because in the US, or at least what I see in Silicon Valley, is that 40 to 50% is sales. Like
Yeah.
even tech companies, like they have a much bigger sales team. Like your sales team is nothing. Like
And
it's
I
typical
imagine
of an academic, or it's typical of a smart guy. He always thinks that my product will sell itself. But what I'm getting to realize over the years is that no, a sales team brings a lot of value actually.
quite likely, and I suspect it's a blind spot, and not just from wanting to hire a sales team perspective, but also the ability to hire and work and empower a sales team. That requires skill too. We've hired. I mean, let's put it this way: the number of sales alumni that we have is 4x our sales team, and a big part of that is we have not been able to help someone come in and sell from day 100, let alone one. The people who've been in the organization, so the two salespeople that we have are the people that have been in the organization from the beginning. And yeah, it's an art. Sales management is an art that we definitely have a long way to go on. I suspect the other part of it may also be that as a services organization, a significant portion of the selling is done by the delivery team. The account managers that I mentioned are actually people who grew up as BAs, business analysts for that particular account, and have evolved into an account manager role. They were always the people because of whom the follow ons and the growth would happen. We've just given them a name, given them an incentive, and that part of it, that part of the way we are structured, maybe the other reason why our sales team is small.
So
I think there's that difference between sectors. depends on who you're selling to, your type of customer, uh, and especially on what's the typical length of project, what's your customer retention, how many repeat customers versus new customers do you typically get, and uh, how much, in terms of the sales process and cycle, uh, how much of that is cold calling on one extreme end versus high level warm business contacts. uh, who do you approach? So a lot of those factors really go into how big a sales team does one want to do.
Very true. I'm sure that is how a well thought through sales team size would have been determined. I will be the first to admit that we have not given it as much thought as we would have liked to. It's gone through a whole series of rounds of iteration and thinking and so on. But yeah, some of those factors are what we need to incorporate even further, I guess.
What are your thoughts on using public interest events and doing analytics on those public interest events as a way to drive customer acquisition? So, for example, US Super Bowl, right? Everybody's crazy about it. What if you were doing live analysis, play by play of Super Bowl, and if you made it interesting, uh, like that's something that can that's public interest, but it's hard. But if you can have a viral moment, then everybody in the US will know about Gramener.
That's a very powerful thing, and arguably that's how our second breakthrough came about. Uh, in 2014, we were playing around with election data, and and Microsoft saw this and said, "Look, why don't you come over? We have a deal with CNN IBM to create put a large touch screen in their office and cover the elections live, and we are the technology partner, and your work on the analysis and the visualizations look promising." I said, okay, great. We worked with CNN and IBM, covered this on national television. I tell you some of the most interesting stories that we
Sure,
have
please.
came that time. This was Rajdeep Sardesai and Bhupendra Chaubey who were presenting. So Bhupendra Chaubey took on a very interesting role. The convention up to that point was the anchor would be given analysis from people, the research team, into their ears, and that's what they narrate. So Bhupendra Chaubey took on an incredible challenge. He said, "Let me be the analyst myself. People can ask me questions. I will answer it live with data that comes on the screen." And some of the things that came up were incredible. And the way he was playing around with it, combining his domain knowledge with the data. Somebody asked, for instance, is there a constituency that acts as a bellwether? If they win this constituency, the party invariably wins the elections. He flushes this around and says, look, until last election, there were three such constituencies, A, B, and C. But as of this election, until now, there is only one constituency, which if a party wins, then it's guaranteed to win the election. That is Faridabad. So let's see in this election if Faridabad wins. Another really interesting question was, tell me which election had the largest number of candidates contesting for it. Again, starts playing around and he says, look, if you look at the history of elections in Tamil Nadu, we see that there was this constituency, Madurantakam, which had 90 candidates standing for elections. 90 is huge, but it is not the highest because in the next year, and he shows the visuals, Pallipet and Avarakurichi had 264 and 249 people standing for elections. Well, that's massive, right? If you take, for instance, what the ballot sheet looks like, and that's almost like a mini booklet where you have to flip through the candidates and find the names of the candidates. But, and then he moves on to the 1991 elections and shows that there is Modakurichi, where 1,033 candidates stood for elections. Now, it's not a booklet, it's practically a book. It might even be the telephone directory of Modakurichi that stood for elections. And he goes on to look at the names. He says, okay, so here's Palnisami K, Palnisami K, Palnisami K, Palnisami K. I mean, if you are Palnisami K, how do you know which Palnisami K you are to vote for yourself? Which possibly was a problem because there are 88 candidates. He scrolls down and says 88 candidates who got zero votes, which means that after standing for election, they didn't even vote for themselves. I mean, how crazy is that? And then goes on to the history. There was a farmers' protest, so these people literally stood outside the election office booth, and whenever somebody came, they gave them 500 rupees and said, "Go register yourself to vote." And because of that, the election commission then changed the minimum cutoff from 500 rupees to 25,000 rupees. I mean, the story just flowed as he did the dashboard. All we had to do was put our logo at the bottom. It was fun. It was personally also very enriching experience for me because while he was doing all of this talking, I gently snuck behind the TV, pretending to look at a monitor, called home and said, "Look, turn on CNN IB and you'll see me on TV."
So were these questions coming in live? Because it would be very
Yeah.
hard to produce this data live. Like,
Oh no. So what we do is not give answers, but we build the technology that gives the answers. So it was made easy enough for him to be able to play around with it live, and he did.
so, like, look,
Wow.
I'm in technology for 20, but like, I got hooked onto computers in seventh grade back in 1992. So it's been 32 years of technology. I can't think of a technology that can be built where you can answer questions like which year did the maximum number of candidates stand in election? Like, what technology did you build to answer to get that data on my fingertips that quickly?
Well, let me share my screen and why don't
Sure.
I just show you?
Yeah.
That's easy enough. So he said, okay, so this is the election scene in 1967 in Tamil Nadu, where you have each of these circles representing one constituency. So that's Perambalur, which had 10 candidates standing for election. Here are the 10 candidates. And look, a couple of them in DMK, a couple of them in Congress, blah, blah, blah.
Give me
But
one
this,
second. Give me 1 second. So what's the back end of this? Is this all this data in an SQL table?
I'll come to the tech behind it in just a minute.
Sure.
I'll just walk you through
Yeah.
the
Yeah. Yeah.
sequence
Yeah.
of that. And then he says, okay, now let's look at the next year. Now
Hmm.
you see that it's mostly DMK that's winning. The color is
But
basically the
Anand,
candidate.
a quick question. This is 2013 or 14 that you're doing this. This is that
Sorry, come,
era's technology, right?
sorry, come again.
This is 2014 or 2013 that you actually did what you're showing us. It's not
2014.
24
Yes,
technology. Right.
correct. This
Okay.
is 2014, exactly as he showed it on the screen.
Got it.
And now, in this was in 1971, but in 1977, now things changed because there is a new party that seems to have come in and swept the elections, which is the ADMK. And there's been an overall spurt in the number of candidates, blah, blah, blah. He moves on like this and says, "Oh, 89, lots of candidates, but nothing stands out." And this is where you see Pallipet and Avarakurichi being huge outliers, which is crazy. But all of that pales in comparison with the Modapurichi election of 1,033 candidates. And look at the names of the candidates. And this is what he did, which is scroll down and see, oh, okay, Palnisami K, Palnisami K, Palnisami K, Palnisami K, which is crazy. Right? And here are the people that actually got zero votes. And obviously, Nachimuttu stood for election and did not vote for himself, nor did his namesake without the S. And yeah, this was how the story unfolded. Now,
Is it because they were like just people didn't reach that page?
no, they were asked to vote
Could be
because
anything.
they were given 500 rupees. No, no, not asked to vote, asked to stand in the election. That doesn't mean they have to come and vote, or even if they come to vote, they don't have to vote for themselves. They didn't particularly want to stand for elections. They probably use their vote to make whoever they wanted win.
The point I wanted to make, Anand, was that the visualization is what prompted these questions. The point I was trying to make was that it wasn't like the question came to me. For example, the question could have been, who is the richest person or who's the most educated person who stood in election in this year. Now you can't answer those questions live because the raw data has to be. So once you give me this visualization, then oh yeah, this visualization helps me answer these interesting questions. But the set of questions is actually defined by the visualization that's already there on the screen.
Not entirely, though you're partly right, and I'll explain both aspects. So, for instance, both these questions, who was the richest? So, you're absolutely right on that in part because so I'll explain the good and the bad. Meaning, um, both the questions, who was the richest or who was the most educated, were both questions that Bhupendra Chaubai would have been able to pull out the right visualization for because we had both the data and the set of visualizations to answer potentially any kind of question that may have come about. An example of a question we would not have been able to answer if it had come was whose wife was the most educated, right? Or spouse rather.
So
Yeah, we don't have the data.
where are you getting this raw data from? Like education or the richest or the
So
poorest? Like,
the election commission has affidavits published of each of the candidates' declarations, which has their education data, demographic data, wealth data, not just wealth, but what kind of assets, what kind of debt. So, in the Karnataka elections, the Karnataka elections, we realized that there was one candidate who had more wealth than her entire wealth in weight in gold.
oh
Another person
wow,
had enough wealth till the Vidhan Sauda's entrance. If you even took 100 rupee notes and covered it, that kind of wealth. And we had put together the visualizations for all of these. So a part of it is preparation, but the good part is it's possible to take a given data set and say, now let's create every possible kind of question out of it, which is
So, so, so,
not too hard.
so you created it all of it of a publicly available data set instead of having some added proprietary data.
Mostly. The only semi private data set was the streaming results of the elections, which CNN and IBN had purchased from Nielsen, and they get access to it earlier and at a higher granularity than the public.
Okay,
so tell
okay.
me this: like you're saying you got the data from election commission and they published the data publicly, probably on their website. But
Correct.
how did you ingest this data? What was that effort like into your SQL tables or whatever?
Right. So the bulk of the data was in textual PDF files with one exception. I think there was one election in Orissa in 1989 or sometime, which had was scanned PDFs, which was tricky, but the rest was at least text. The next step is convert that PDF to text and then extract it into Excel-like tables, which took its own sweet time because we had to figure out, oh, okay, this is a page number, get rid of it. Oh, in some cases, there is a person's name that spills onto the next row. People in Gujarat, for instance, have a long name plus a long alias, and that messes up things. So handle all of these exceptions, and we released this code as open source. It's on GitHub, so any election scraping result can now be automated. Once it's there in the form of CSVs, then it gets onto the database, which serves as the backend for the visuals.
Very
So
interesting. So, can I
So,
just ask?
a common thing that I hear that a lot of data analysis is actually just data cleaning and the mechanics of it. How much of that do you actually see? Because you're the guy in the trenches doing it.
So we see a lot less of it because we have until recently refused to take such projects because we've been stupid and said, we don't want your money, we just want cool stuff, and stayed away from it, which meant that roughly 60-70% of our work was data engineering. If we took that up, then 95% of our work would just be getting and cleaning the data.
And you'd be very surprised that what I've realized is that a lot of money is made just doing the grunt work. Like,
Oh yeah, that's where the
yeah,
money is.
yeah,
That is where the money is.
yeah, yeah. So, what's the most interesting question that you have answered in your 12 years career running Grammarly that you're most proud of? Share with us something interesting.
I'll share one which has a special significance mainly because it was the defining moment that created Gramner as a data science company. So this was the energy commissioner of Andhra Pradesh who said, "See, we have we have energy data for the entire state, and we are facing a problem. We want to go for automated meter readings, and our unions are resisting for obvious reasons. One of the arguments that we've put forward is a reason why we want to go for automation is fraud. They're saying, give us proof. And they're saying, don't give me evidence of one or two people or even a dozen people because we are 100,000 people strong. And there will always be a few bad
Sure.
apples. We need systematic evidence. Now, you guys, he said, are pitching yourself as an energy management company, that's fine. But is there something that you can do to help with this data? So, okay, fine. If it will help us land an energy management contract, this was before we were into data analytics. So this was about a terabyte and a half of data, which she extracted into a hard disk and gave it to us, and was ultra detailed. Every person in the state, every month for almost a decade. So we did the most simple thing possible, which is plotted a histogram of how many people have meter readings of 0, 1, 2, 3, 50, 100, 200, and so on, expecting to find a normal curve or at least a log normal curve, which is kind of what we found. Very few people have meter readings of 0, 1, 2. Very few people have meter readings of 100, 1,000, and all. Well, 100 is common, but 1,000, for example. But there were huge spikes at 50 units, 100 units, 200 units, 300 units, exactly the slab boundaries. Now, this can happen for one of, I mean, well, if they move to the next slab, it is not the incremental, but the base that is built at the next higher tariff, which means that I have a strong economic incentive as a consumer to stay at or below the slab. But how does that happen? Yeah, I could either watch my meters and the instant it hits 100, turn off all lights and fans, no more electricity for the rest of the month, which is, yeah, who does that? Or I bribe the lineman. Now, it was clear that this much of fraud was happening, but one thing stumped us. What we didn't understand was why there were also spikes at 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, and so on when there were no slab boundaries there. So we took it to the energy commissioner and said, "Sir, we have your proof. We can even quantify it by the height of the spike." And there's more interesting stuff that we can do, like tell you in which region, which segment this is coming. And he actually got very intrigued by that and said, "Okay, okay, hold on. Tell me in this particular region what happened." And we looked at it and said, "This is very strange because in March, the spike actually shifted downwards, which we have never seen so far. April, May, it kind of was not a spike. And then June, it suddenly shifted up." I said, "Damn it. This section manager that everybody's been complaining about got transferred into this section. When he comes in, all the fraud goes down." And then I start getting new complaints. Now I know why I'm getting those complaints about this guy. He's played too straight. It's like, wow, okay. I didn't realize that you could get down to an individual level with that. But then we said, "Sir, we have another question. We understand why people are committing fraud at the 50 units, 100 units, and so on. But why is there fraud happening at 10 units, 20 units, 30 units?" He laughed. He said, "Guys, you're thinking in a one track mind. This is not fraud. This is laziness." What do you mean? Said, "See, these people are not going to take the meter readings. They're just guessing from the past month's meter readings, sitting in the office. They're cooking up numbers. And when people cook up numbers, they cook up round numbers." Said, "That guy that just left the office before you came in, he has not been taking readings in a colony for a good 5 months. Why? Sir, there is a pack of dogs in the colony. I'm not able to go inside." This is the kind of thing that I'm trying to get rid of by the meat reading automation. What you've done is what I need. Great. At which point we said, "Shit, this is the business that we need to be."
Very interesting. That's
We
what
didn't
got you
realize
It's
that.
such
started.
an
Yeah.
awesome combination of using data on one side and the ground level human insights on the other, and then combining it to get to the actionability on what's really happening.
And also having a
Exactly.
person who was interested enough to give you 1.5 terabytes of data.
Correct. Which was, yeah,
Actually,
mind
that brings me
bogglingly.
a very different question. Uh, Data security and data privacy. I mean, 1.5 terabytes, and this was back in the day. But how do you, as doing so much of data analysis, how do you manage that? Because there could be leakages on your part, there could be accusations, there could be a load of problems around that.
Absolutely. So we luckily never take data that we should not have. Put another way, if the data leaks and that's going to cause material harm, the data doesn't even come to our environment. We work in the client's environment and use their security measures. And that's pretty much the only way. So in this case, for instance, we never got the consumer IDs. We only got the rest of the columns. So it was when the energy commissioner looked at the data, he said, "Are this lady in Jubilee Hills? Oh, okay, now I know." So there was one lady. whose meter readings were 200, 200, 200, 200 month after month, 200, 200, 200, 200, and then January 350, and then back to 200, 200, 200. Said, yeah, this is a famous personality. I won't tell you who it is, but you know them. And they had a wedding in their house. The meter would have gone to 1,000 easily. The lineman would have gone and told the lady, ma'am, this month, please let me put you in the highest slab because we generally don't audit the highest slab. And if we audit you this month, I am done for. So that is why you're seeing the 350 in just this particular month. Now, he could figure that out. We couldn't.
Hmm. Got it. And actually, that's the other thing. You got anonymized data. In my more recent last few years, I am start veering towards the thing that there is nothing which is anonymized. Everything can be put two and two together. There is you can wipe out IDs, you can wipe out anything, but you can build that back up. So how do you manage that, or rather, how do you manage the risk protection of that?
That is a hard problem to solve. And by and large, the approach we've been taking is make sure that we work within whatever privacy infrastructure, legal, technical, that has been set up to solve this problem. Futuristically, there are, I'm sure, ways where we could look back at the data that we have gotten in the past and be able to extract more information from that. But that's not something that we know well enough to be able to anticipate, nor our clients know well enough. So we loop in their legal team, we loop in their technical team and say, what are the guarantees that you've given your clients? Make sure you don't breach those.
Got it.
And we will, in good faith, work on that so that we are at least not wrong, though it is not necessarily the ideal situation. What happens when we go beyond that is it starts raising a series of questions that take too long to answer and also slows down the progress of any kind of intelligence coming out of it.
Yes.
So we just find it easier
So,
to stick to
Anand,
the
how much
rules.
of this data analytics is because of Anand? Because when you're describing these, what's at least what I'm grasping is that somebody else couldn't have done it. Like it doesn't seem like it's scalable. It seems like this is happening because Anand is looking at the data. It's Anand's brains that's looking at the data. So how much of it is because of Anand and how much of it is actually scalable? Like for that electricity data, do you think somebody else could have done it if it wasn't you?
At that time, perhaps not in our team, or not, perhaps not, certainly not in our team. And yes, you're right, that does limit scalability to some extent, but only to some extent is what we're learning. There are So firstly, there are, of course, several people like me who have this kind of interest, passion, whatever, and they tend to tell great stories. And we've been lucky enough that Gramner was a hub to attract such people because we kept sharing such stories, and they say, "Oh yeah, I like that. Can I work with you?" kind of thing. The second thing that we learned as a lesson in scalability is a big part of why people don't implement this is because it's really too hard to implement. The visualization that I showed you, for instance, is not something that one could do in Tableau or Power BI. So, which is where we took all of what we had learned and put it into a platform that makes it easy and arguably didn't do a great job nor tried hard enough to popularize it so that the others could do it as well. So that therefore became an edge for us. The third thing is training through osmosis. So people hear these stories and say, "Oh, I can do stuff like this." The 10th time they start doing some of these, and many of the stories that I'm sharing are actually stuff that my colleagues have done and come back and report it to me saying, "This is what we've done." So I say, "Oh, great, thanks. Here's a story that I can tell." So scalable as much as a teachable skill is, but luckily it's teachable.
Sure. So one thing that I'm realizing as I hear about your career is that sharing has been very productive for you, and that's what I've realized in my life too. That if you give one out to the world, you get 10 back. Like you shared your assignments in your statistics class in your term one. We all had statistics in term one, which was a difficult subject for a lot of us, and that set you towards the journey of actually getting the gold medal at IIM Bangalore. And then at I got attracted to you because I read your blog, sanand.net. That's how I said, this guy sounds interesting. Because you were sharing what you were doing. And subsequently, you sharing your work on the blog that's attracted other storytellers and other analytics people to you. Now, for me, what I've realized is that sharing takes effort, sharing takes time. Like, I do a lot of work that sometimes I feel I should put on a webcam when I'm coding so that, because, uh, but then who's going to put on a webcam? Like, and the other thing that stops people from sharing is this idea that I'm going to look like a fool because somebody will know how to use a better way to use Visual Studio Code. They'll know more keyboard shortcuts than me, and they'll think, "Dude, you've been programming for 32 years and you don't know this shortcut." So I've now for a lot of people that are watching this, I want to tell them that overcome these two hurdles. Number one, that you will look stupid. Please don't worry about it because most of us will look stupid. So just don't worry about that. But the first hurdle, how did you overcome this hurdle? That look, even writing a blog, it took a lot of effort, right? Like the first draft doesn't go online. It takes revisions, it takes effort. How did you overcome that hurdle? That sharing has an initial cost to it before it starts to give you the benefits.
Like I mentioned earlier, I believe that practically every bad has an intrinsic good. Like my lack of memory led to my taking
Sure,
notes.
that's interesting. Yeah.
In this case, it's ego and a desire for fame.
Hmm.
And I don't have much of an opportunity to become famous in any other way. But what if I write? And that was a bigger motivation, just satisfying my pride, than the effort that it takes. Until the point when a few of those pieces of writing start hitting the mark. I started doing this when I was at school. There was this magazine, PC Quest,
Yep, I remember
and I
that.
read it.
Yeah. Page like first word to the last word, everything was right. Yeah.
So I badly wanted to write for PC Quest just to be famous like these cool people. And I wrote articles for PC Quest, which incidentally I still have. When I say wrote, I mean wrote with the intention of sending it over to PC Quest and having them publish. I never even figured out how to do that. But that started the journey. I said, okay, at least let me get my name published in the school magazine, which sounds like I'll be someone famous. Made no difference. And then similarly at campus, let me try and get my articles in by being the editor of one of the rundown magazines. Okay, fine, that helped. So it was only until it took till 96 stroke 97 when the web emerged, and at that point blogging had not yet started. So I created a website, and it was largely just a dump of me and what who I was. One of my cousins had looked at it and said, "You are like TN Station, always talking about yourself." Didn't put me down. Okay, chalo, my website, let me talk about myself. But then it started me on a journey of, okay, let me then start writing about interesting links that I find. So, which is what I started just before I got into IMB. Every day, I would put in a link or a few links of here is something that I found interesting on the internet. And from 99 to 2005, it was just a link block, which was a term that was coined later. So the standard was very low, and I just needed regularity, or as Means put it
I
earlier,
think you
discipline.
just your respect in my eyes actually increased when you said when you were grown enough to actually acknowledge that it was wanting fame and wanting and the pride which allowed you to overcome the cost or the inertia of not wanting to do it. It takes time, takes effort. So that's very good. I think being able to recognize that and being able to celebrate that there is nothing wrong with wanting fame, wanting pride in my work. So that's awesome. Yeah. And also the other thing is that look, I wanted to write articles in PC Quest, and I wrote them, and I never even sent them in to get published. And it requires failures like that to then finally have a sanand.net blog, which has, I think, has had very positive results in your life. So like that fear of failure, like Migs has this whole I think 10
eight, eight
episodes on
episodes
how to be
recorded.
a 8 episodes on how to be a good investor, recorded, edited, but not released. So
Mm.
this fear of like I'm gonna look stupid, I'm gonna fail.
I'm starting
So
to get a bit more
yeah.
confidence while doing this podcast, and maybe at some point I'll start that channel. Uh, I've got 8 videos. Of them, 4 or 5 are edited, and 3 or 4. Then I'm like, you know what? I couldn't see myself talking and without pointing out mistakes. Like, ये क्या कर दिया है? ऐसे थोड़ी ना. Just like
Mm.
I watch a movie and I watch other things, it's easy to say for someone else, and then you look at yourself and like, यार, ये तो बाकी सबसे भी बेकार है.
I tell you, I never watch my videos. It's a miserable experience. I just give up. कर दिया, छोड़ दिया,
No,
बस.
So
unfortunately,
Anand, did
and
you
this is again, I mean, the first 5 or 6, even for the podcast that we did, I was editing them. Now we've got people helping us. Um, and I couldn't
Ah.
escape not looking at all of us. And not just once. When you're editing, firstly, you're the first viewer, and you're also, while editing, you're actually watching, say, a 2 hour episode, you're probably watching it 5 times because rewind, forward, cut, ye, wo, karte, karte. And that,
Yeah.
to some extent, I don't know whether that increases the confidence or that highlights कि यार मतलब I'm not a whatever put your in the square bracket.
so Anand, we probably have all of us here have 30 more years of work life ahead of us if some more inventions and discoveries don't happen. So, what's next for you? Is do you still have the fire in you to create big impact, or has that fire, like with age, it goes down? Has that fire gone down, or is it more about, look, I'm just gonna take it easy, meditate, and reflect on my life? And so, where are you in
Oh,
your
see,
journey, and how do you look forward?
the fire has, if anything, increased, but it's a slightly different kind of fire in the sense I'm not a very uh, altruistic or I'm not looking for impact.
Mm,
I'm looking to have fun.
mm,
These data stories are fun.
mm,
I'm not going to let go of that. I retired in 2012, and since then I've been pursuing a hobby. This hobby is so cool. I'm not going to let go of it forever. I've been programming since I was 13, and there have been a few days in between when I have not programmed, but only a few days. Otherwise, I program every day. It's kind of like that. It's not work. It's not impact. It's who I am. That's not going to change.
it's very interesting. I started programming at the age of 12 or 13, and at the age of 14 or 15, my dad asked me, why do you program so much? And, as a 15-year-old, the answer came from my heart, and I didn't even have to think for a moment to reply. That they're writers that write, they're singers who sing. I'm a programmer. That's why I program. Like, it's who we are. It's like there's nothing else I would do than write
And I
code.
still remember, so in
You
class
can't take it
five,
out of.
that was our first time we entered like a computer room in our school. So class 5 was like in the mid 80s, early mid 80s for us. And uh, I kid you not, I can still remember the smell of that computer room that we had,
Yeah.
and of course, I think at some point, unless my mom's now thrown it away, I probably still have those 5.25 inch floppy disk boxes that I used to have with uh, Need for Speed, which was like the pure basic version of those games. Now it's like a full PS5 game with like proper computer keyboard type of games and basic programming. And then my story is I left coding. I left coding after graduating in electronics, and after that, IIM Bangalore, and then marketing and business and everything, and someone else was doing the coding. And but I've realized one thing, that basic infrastructure in your mind never goes away. what you've learned in school. So now, getting back into what I call the new coding we were discussing earlier is the prompt engineering. Uh, but even for that, you need to know the basics. Uh, the hardware part, which I'm now in the process, I'm halfway through of building a server at home to run my own queries rather than because I'm a half one year. So I decided that you know what, I'm spending too much money on the cloud. I'm going to run it at home. It's cheaper if I'm running it for 6 months. It will pay back. So I'm building that server. And what am I getting, or how am I able to do it? Is because there's a lot of public information. Everything is there on it. But to read that is that basic infrastructure that whether it's school, college, that coding as a kid, like you were saying, Viks, and that is what helps all of us. It's what you learned as a kid and what your interests are and why you're on. And like you were saying, is your profession is your hobby and your hobby is your profession, and that's the best any of us can ever ask for. Of course, sometimes when you're 20, 25, you need to earn some money to reach that level, but that's the ideal situation that I'm so glad that you've already reached there. And
Anand, you said you don't want to have impact, you want to have fun, and programming and telling stories to data is fun for you. But running an organization, we all know that the actual work is probably 10% of our time. 90% of the time is the bullshit. Is the lawyers, is the financing, is the bankers, is the HR, it's processes. So, have you been able to keep the bullshit percentage low in your life by having your co-founders do it, having a structure that does it around you, or how much
Exactly.
time are you able to actually do the storytelling and the programming and not do the everything else?
A surprising amount actually, and you're right, it's the co-founders. I mean, they basically looked at me and said, okay, A, this guy is going to completely mess it up if he does it. B, anyway, if we give it to him, he's not going to do it, so we'll take care of all of the rest. And it's like, you do your cool stuff, you do whatever you do, because anyway we are not going to you're not going to listen to us. And yeah, I've been having fun.
Sure.
uh,
And
I tell you, yeah, if not for the rest of the co-founders, none of this would have
I've
happened.
got some very senior advisors who've been literally every day for many months now telling me I need someone at the co-founder level rather than at the next round for my fund, precisely because of this. Because someday I miss my tax filing, someday I miss my. It's not a day. Like I realize that 1 month later is. And Viks knows this is I lost my website just because I didn't renew, and there was like so much on that website. Of course, it wasn't public. There was always that there was a password thing and all that. But yeah, Viks, the good thing is that I
Anand,
managed to
how
get
do
that back.
you
By the way, I managed to get that back.
uh, you did manage to get that back? Oh, thanks for letting me know, Migs. Anand, how do you distinguish between the culture at, say, I'm Bangalore at London Business School? Do you have some insights on that?
The students firstly had more experience literally, and that showed in the discussions. For example, you'd see them talk about, so when there was a discussion on, let's say, multinational M&A, there would be a marketing head of IBM who would say, yeah, that's right, that's kind of how we did it, but I wasn't sure how exactly you handled this part of it. And you get to learn as much from your fellow students as you did from the teachers, and that also obviously made for a far richer discussion with the teachers. They needing to stay ahead, and the students playing off of that. Having said that, I would also say that they were not necessarily smarter, in that the kind of sharp answers that someone would give at IMB would have easily beaten, well, not necessarily easily, but on many occasions would have beaten the majority of the answers that I heard at LBS as well. So, in short, more experience, not necessarily smarter.
Interesting.
When
Very
you say
interesting.
not necessarily smart, it's probably because of people like me. In case you don't know, I went and after many years, I did another MBA at London Business School. So मेरे जैसे लोग जो आंसर देते होंगे, I'm sure there were a few like, and I think there were a couple in your batch also who did follow a similar path and all that.
पता नहीं, I also have a feeling that the lack of experience may actually be correlated with smartness. Never tested it, but there is something to be said for
I think what
ignorance.
you said, I would phrase it similarly, but slightly add the lack of experience sometimes makes one believe in their own smartness a bit more.
Possibly. It also, I think, at least on a few, maybe rare occasions, avoids helps us not know what is impossible, and we go ahead
Exactly.
and do the impossible.
The foolish
Yeah.
optimism, right? You're optimist because you're foolish. I think that tends to work out a lot of times in life. Yeah.
Anand, one
Anand, do you have
question.
any?
So we've talked about Gramener, we've talked about that a lot, and recently you did that exit and you exited. So I want two areas on the exit. One is why you went in for that exit. Well, it's not an exit for you personally, but from a company perspective. And secondly, how was the process? Which I'm asking because exits, even after like 15 years as a private equity venture capital guy, I find completions and all that still very stressful. So for you doing it like maybe once or twice in their entire life, how was that process?
So the reason was all the co-founders had kids who were getting into college, and many of the senior people in the organization were getting to the point where it was time that some kind of monetary benefit
So
came
is
in.
that an age or
Almost
a life
uh,
cycle reason for many of your co-founders? Got it.
correct. This is not the first time we tried raising funds. We did it in 2013, we did it in 2016 or so, and just pre-COVID when COVID just disrupted the whole thing. But in every case, it was also very clear for us that if we did raise funding, we are profitable, we are growing, we don't have any problem, we can continue. It is when the kids start going into college and we start looking at the college fee and we start looking at, okay, have I really saved enough? Yeah, maybe just about, but I'd rather not sell my property to fund that. Therefore, can we do this? That it becomes serious. And for the next level of leadership as well, that it had been long enough that it was getting to be a stage where we say, look, let's get some cash. And we were open to partial, we were open for full. But when we interacted with Strive, two things happened. One, we just loved the people. It was very down to earth and very non-flashy, but with, at least for me personally, with the kind of data that they had, it was like, can you hire me? As for the process itself, as Viks, you had mentioned, do I leave it to my co-founders? Yeah, I just completely left it to my co-founders. One in particular, we, and so I will, in terms of the process mix, I'll tell you what he shared with me in terms of learnings. First, he said, "Look, this is once in a lifetime kind of an experience, and yeah, obviously you would never go through your first acquisition ever again. But for him, it was as good as a Harvard MBA." He said, there are some mistakes that we made in our structuring. We should have, for instance, gone ahead and moved our headquarters to Singapore, which we had planned earlier. Because from a tax perspective, it's hitting us now. We chose not to do that then because partly because we didn't get good advice when we asked for it, and partly because even though that advice was not direct saying never do this, we chose the easier route of less administrative hassle than the tax impact later because we weren't thinking about it that time. So he said that's one of the things I'd probably go back and correct. Secondly, he said, look, the amount of hassle that you go through in an acquisition is the same whether you're $10 million or $100 million. So I would rather do it for $100 million again than for $10 million because why would I ever do it otherwise? Those are the two that I remember. He has many more like this.
Yeah. No, no, I'm glad
Tell
you
us a
was
little bit
stayed
about
away from that
Strive.
process and kept your peace of mind.
Tell us a little bit. Tell us a little bit about Strive. Like, what business is Strive in, and what was it about their data that excited you so much?
So Strive is an edtech and a publishing and a data operations company. So, for instance, 20% of the world's research goes through Strive. Nature, the magazine, by Springer, is actually behind the scenes produced by Stripe. That makes for an incredible wealth of unstructured data. So we are working with one of the leading chemical database publishers, and let's put it this way: two-thirds of the world's chemical databases data behind the scenes is by and large coming from us. A significant chunk of the data that goes into financial services providers is coming from us. So what that means is, heck, we have more data than the data providers do in some cases,
And
and
Strive, is it a US company? Where is it company headquartered?
Strive is a PE-owned company with the leadership sitting in the US, the vast majority of the organization sitting in Chennai, Pondicherry, Philippines, and the headquarters being in Singapore,
Okay.
tax-wise, or the corporate headquarters is in Singapore.
Okay.
So is it like an Indian-owned company or Indian cultured company?
100% Indian.
And who are the founders of Strive?
I don't know. So it's grown organically through so many acquisitions that I'm not sure we can even pinpoint to that. It's an amalgamation
Got
of a
it.
large number of organizations. And
So,
every private equity
So it's
round, the
very much a
leadership
buy
gets
and build,
replaced
and
with.
as when you mentioned प्राइवेट इक्विटी उसके बाद तो वो फाउंडर्स तो probably होंगे भी नहीं और अगर होंगे भी तो कुछ नॉन एग्जैक या साइड रोल
Correct.
पे होंगे.
But the next
Got it.
But the next level of leadership, very interestingly, it was nice the way they introduced themselves. So one gentleman said, "So I'm so and so. I've been in this organization for 27 years." The next person said, "I've been in this organization for 25 years." And I'm like, so I was not even working then. The next person said, "Oh, sorry, I've been in the organization only for 22 years." Okay, we get the idea.
but I've heard that private equity run businesses are usually more cutthroat, right? Like they wanted ROI. They're very much focused on ROI, and
Correct. Though I don't know how it's worked here. The leadership, every iteration definitely gets replaced. But below that, it doesn't look like it's
So
happened.
I'll just
okay,
add
that's
Viks
very
on
good to know.
that. Is and of course I come with a bias having worked for many years in private equity. Uh, I think every business should be chasing ROI or profits or some ways. Private equity do
No,
it in a
see, because
particular way, and
start.
I think it's given a bad name, in my opinion, in my biased opinion, is because of certain large buyout funds which actually control a lot of capital and are, as you said, ruthless. Now, most of the
But I
lower
feel mixed
market
that
and mid
that
market
founder.
private equity funds, you still see in an organization where people are important, relationships remain important, whether it's between a private equity fund and the company management or anywhere else. The moment a company where the process becomes supreme to people, and I'll say this, let's take the extreme end in say a Google or an Amazon. I mean, seriously, कौन CEO होता है, their business is not going to move any which way, at least in the short and medium term. Long term strategy is debatable, but कुछ होने नहीं वाला. But the moment you've got a smaller company and people relationships, and whether it's private equity or anything, people are going for the same outcomes. So that was my biased intervention on that part.
No, mix. I feel that founders have a lot of authority within the organization, and because of that authority, which is not on paper many times, but it's just because. you were the first one in the door. You get to take long term bets. You get to do projects without immediate ROIs. You get to do projects that may or may not have a result 2 years down the line. More gut feeling projects. But I think private equity guys may not want to, may not be willing
And
to
I think
go
that's
into that.
the best time to discuss that is when you're doing the deal. And if someone doesn't discuss it because they're getting a lot of money, then it's their problem, right? You can't complain later कि मैंने यार वो पूछा ही नहीं difficult question क्योंकि पैसा मिल रहा था उस time पर. And ठीक है, then that was your priority.
वो तो है.
I'll give you another example. Forget private equity. Early stage venture capital, that's the other extreme, right? Where the person, you're betting on the person. That's what I do right now. It's there's hardly a product. Even if there's a product, there's hardly a PMF. If there's a product market fit, then पता नहीं यार 3 क्लाइंट्स के बाद अगले 75 लेंगे या नहीं लेंगे. So it's the person. But even then, and I hear this all the time, and I want to hear this because I want those questions. And we were talking about this, Anand. I want people to ask that question. Actually, I want founders to ask that question: Is after an investment, what will be my decision making? I've heard VCs will just take over the decision making, or VCs want it to be only a unicorn or a decacorn, and that's about it, and so on. And all of those questions are valid, and all of those impressions are also valid for different people. The question is, let's say, if someone says, "Ki, as a founder, Viks, you're saying, as a founder, a VC comes in, takes 30% ownership, and gives you X million for that 30%. अब फ्री में थोड़ी ना है कुछ भी. So the VC will involve themselves in certain ways as long as it's not completely harmful to the business, which occasionally it is, but largely I don't see it. What one needs to understand is there are different viewpoints and different strategies for VCs also. So is the VC going in for making it a decathon? एंड इट्स अ हिट और मिस कि ठीक है नहीं हुआ कोई बात नहीं मेरे को फर्क नहीं पड़ता है कि ये 6 महीने में कंपनी फोल्ड हो जाए बट यू हैव टू टेक दैट बेट वो बेसिकली कि लास्ट बॉल है 6 मारो एंड नहीं मार सकते हो तो आउट हो जाओ इज दैट द पॉलिसी और इज इट द टेस्ट मैच पॉलिसी कि बेटा विकेट बचाओ और जितना लंबा खेल सकते हो खेलो या फिर समथिंग इन बिटवीन है दैट दैट इज द क्वेश्चन दैट I recommend every founder to ask the investor. And if the founder hasn't asked because either culturally they don't want to ask or for whatever reason, or because पैसा मिल रहा है पैसे को मना लोग करना difficult होता है, the investor, in my opinion, should provoke that question. कि देखो ऐसा होगा. I have had situations, I'll be honest, I have had situations where I have provoked that question and we have realized that in a deal which I could have done, I have lost that to another VC क्योंकि we have realized कि नहीं match कर रहा है. I think that is better than finding that out after the investment. 90% of startups fail. Everyone knows that. I think some people say it's 99%, whatever. It's a huge number. Only a few succeed. But out of the ones that fail, the biggest reason for VC backed startups to fail is because founder and VCs disagreed. And what's the biggest reason to disagree? इसकी आपने पहले बात ही नहीं करी कि यार आपको पता ही नहीं था कि किस पॉइंट पे आप डिसएग्री करोगे. Sorry, that was like it's so close to my heart. I just keep doing this day in and day out. Is and that's why Anand, when you were saying
It's
about
hard.
asking the question and uh, yeah, it's there are like so many cultural differences, and I want people to ask the question always, especially when we hire
But
people in India, whether it's for me or for our portfolio companies. I encourage them. Keep make them ask questions rather than you get a wrong output and then everyone is unhappy.
wise words.
It was very good reconnecting with you again, and I hope a lot of juniors watch this. I feel like we are all building a pyramid. Like we're all standing on top of people who came before us, right? And I feel that when I was at IIM Bangalore in 1998, if I could have watched taped interviews of alumni 10 years prior to me, that would have informed my own career so much better. So I think people watch this, and they can build on top of your career. And I think as I've looked around in the IMB alumni network, you're one of the most fascinating people I've found. And I still feel that you said that you are interested in having fun and not impact. But I think you might want to. I would like you to refocus that energy. I think you can have very large impact. I think with the skills you have, if you take start taking out 20% of time and say, look, I'm just going to try and have impact. I think there's wonders you can do with your skills. Uh, so with that thought, thank you once again for coming. And Mix and I, we were talking, we'd like to have you more often as a co-host of the show, and we'll plan that and see how that goes.
So thanks for having me, guys. It was fun talking, but more importantly, fun reconnecting. Really.